Chapter 1. The Silence She Chose. The World First Forget Her Name on Purpose. Evelyn Ray did the rest. She stood at the edge of the northern outpost, breath fogging in the mountain wind, and watched the torches burn low against the snow. Somewhere below, the wolf shoaled a long, shivering chorus that rose from the forest and melted into the night sky. Every note carried a memory she refused to remember. 5 years. 5 winters of pretending the world was made only of light and shadow, never sound. When she first came to Widow's Peak, she told them she was deaf. She said it with her hands, not her voice, fingers spelling a lie so gently that even the truth believed her. The villagers had nodded, offered her work, and given her the corner beat off the healer's hut. That was all she needed. Silence, a roof, and a reason to keep breathing. Now, at 22, she moved through the outpost like a ghost who had learned to clean wounds. The soldiers called her the mute girl, the little medic, the one woe doesn't flinch. She smiled politely at words she never heard, and when they weren't looking, she listened to everything. Listening was dangerous. It was also how she survived. She read through movement, the twitch of a brow, the roll of a shoulder, the shape of mouths forming words she could not afford to answer. She watched instead of speaking. She noticed what others missed, a hidden dagger, a trembling hand, the moment pain became fear. In a place built on battle, noticing kept her alive, but tonight something in the air changed. Thuin carried a scent older than her lie iron, pine, and power. The soldiers knew it before she did. One by one, their laughter died, their spin straightened. Armor clinked, torches lowered, and the courtyard stilled. Then came the echo of boots, steady, unhurried, belonging to someone who didn't need to hurry to be obeyed. The Alpha King had returned. Evelyn didn't look up. She bent over the man whose arm she was stitching and pretended. Shekel didn't feel the earth's heartbeat change beneath her knees. Her hand stayed calm. Her pulse did not doubt the story essayed. Edric Thorne had been born beneath a blood moon, his cry shaking Thefrist into submission. They said he conquered the border clans before Hedern 20, that his wolf was larger than any man's shadow and his mercy smaller than any god's. Shek knew all the stories. She had once lived one of them. A shadow fell across her hands. She looked up out of instinct and froze. He was taller than the stories allowed. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, eyes the color of amber caught in flame. Battle dust streaked his armor. His jaw was set with exhaustion, but his presence was whole, like the air itself belonged to him. The last time she'd seen those eyes, they had been full of moonlight and fury. He hadn't changed. The world had. "You're the healer?" He asked Dodd. She blinked at these lips, reading the shape of each word. Then she nodded. No voice, no question. Only movement? Deaf? Hissed, another nod. Something flickered behind his eyes, not pity, not disbelief, but curiosity sharpened into warning. He reached for a wounded soldier's arm and examined the clean line of her stitch. "Efficient," he murmured. "Precise." His gaze lifted again, searching her facius, though the truth might flinch. It didn't. She'd had 5 years of practice. Had straightened, dismissing her with a curt nod. "See that she's given rations and a room near the infirmary," he told his captain. Then to her, "Good work." The words were simple, but they sank into her like stones dropped in still water. She bowed slightly and turned away before he could see the tremor in her hands. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the narrow window of her quarters, moonlight cutting a silver line across her floor, and listened to the fortress breathe. The sound of his voice, though she hadn't heard it, haunted her memory. She could still remember it from another lifetime. She had been to Ventine the night the moon goddess marked them. One heartbeat, she was the daughter of a rebel lord kneeling in chains before the young Alpha King. The next, she felt the bond ignite, an invisible thread tying her pulse to his. Edric's eyes had widened then, too. Just before war and duty swallowed whatever mercy had been in them, her father died 3 days later. Sharon that night and never looked back. The lie of Solence was born from that moment. Now, fate had dragged her back into the circle she had tried to escape. She wondered if the goddess had grown impatient, or if guilt had finally found her scent. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Marta, the older healer who had taken Heron, stood in the threshold with a candle. "They say the king asked your name," Marta whispered. "I told them you don't speak." Evelyn's heart lurched. "He asked her name. Maybe he wants to thank you," Marta said. "Maybe he just noticed good work." But look in her eyes said what neither dared to voice when a king notices a ghost. The ghost stops being safe. Evelyn nodded and smiled, the same soft curve that fooled everyone. When Marta left, she blew out the candle and sat in the dark, tracing invisible scars across her palms. Some truths were louder than words. Thebin still lived. She could feel it now, faint but certain, like a drumbeat echoing beneath the snow. Hadn't know it yet, but the moment his eyes met hers, it had awakened Dot. For 5 years, she had hidden behind silence. But silence, like snow, always melts Dot, and somewhere in the heart of the fortress, the Alpha King dreamed of a girl he couldn't remember and woke with the taste of her name on his tongue. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Forgotten Name, the morning after his return. The fortress carried a new kind of silence heavy, aware like if world itself was holding its breath. Even the crows perched on the rampart seemed cautious, as though afraid to interrupt something they didn't understand. Evelyn moved through the infirmary with her usual calm precision, but every sense was alert. The Alpha King's presence pressed against the walls like invisible heat. She could feel him everywhere, the weight of command in the corridors, the scent often in steel that lingered long after he passed. The soldiers whispered his name in tones of both fear and devotion. The Wolf King, the Blood Crown, the On who doesn't kneel. They spoke Haida's prayer and warning both. Evelyn said nothing, of course. She smiled when they looked her way, nodded when they gestured, and tucked her thoughts behind the quiet mask she'd worn for half a decade. But inside, her heart was a storm she couldn't silence. She hadn't expected him to remember her. How could he? 5 years, a war, and a kingdom had passed between them. And yet, when their eyes met in the courtyard, she had seen a flicker of recognition. A shadow, a heartbeat too long dawed a terrified her, because recognition was dangerous. Recognition meant the past wasn't done dot by noon. The fortress courtyard was alive again. Soldiers sparred, servants carried baskets off linens, and the clang of steel echoed across the yard like distant thunder. Evelyn gathered fresh bandages, nodding to a guard who offered to carry the basket for her. But when shuttered in the corner, her steps faltered. He was there. The Alpha King stood in the training ring, shirtless beneath the weak autumn sun, a sword in his hand that looked too small for him. Sweat darkened the edges of his hair, and every motion carried the quiet violence of precision, the kind that came from years of discipline rather than anger. He was not fighting to prove power. He was fighting to remember control. Evelyn would have looked away. She told herself to, but her feet betrayed her, stopping at the edge of the crowd that had gathered to watch. His movements were hypnotic fluid, lethal, beautiful. When he struck, the air itself cemento cut. Then, as if sensing her gaze, he turned. For one breathless second, his eyes locked onto hers. The world shrank dot, she froze, every muscle screaming to look down, to hide, to remember who she was supposed to be. But her body didn't obey. Something older did something bone deep and moon-marked. Her wolf stirred. A murmur rippled through the soldiers as the king lowered his sword but didn't look away. His expression didn't change, but his voice, when it came, was colder than steel dipped in winter. "Leave us." The crowd obeyed instantly, dispersing like mist. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her throat. He stepped closer. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. His gaze never left her face. When Hess stepped, only a single arm's length separated them. "Do you know?" He asked. His voice was quiet, but it wasn't a question for a healer. It was a demand for truth. Evelyn swallowed hard. The lie was ready on her lips, always ready, but it burned this time. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to let her eyes flick down to his myth, pretending to read the shape of words she couldn't hear. He saw through it, deaf, hammer mirrored. Half to himself, as if testing the word again. Then, without warning, he dropped his sword. It hit the ground with a sharp clang. Her head flinched instinctively toward the sound. His eyes narrowed. And that meant the silence between them was louder than any shout. He said nothing else, just stared at her, studying every flicker of her expression. Then, finally, he took a step back, retrieved his sword, and said in a tone that could have meant mercy or promise, "Stay close. I'll have need of you." And then he left her standing there, heart pounding so violently she could feel it echo through her ribs like the beating of wings. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her room felt too small, the air too thin. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look in his sharp, searching, too close to memory. She got up, lit a single candle, and sat at her tiny desk, pulling out the worn leather notebook she kept hidden beneath the floorboard. It was filled with sketches, herbs, and notes written the silent language of her own invention. At the back, pressed between two thin pages, lay a single torn scrap of parchment, her father's handwriting. She had carried it since the night she ran. The ink had faded, but she could still trace the words with her fingertips. "If the moon goddess is cruel, then she is cruel with purpose. The bond she gives is not to bless, it is to reveal." Evelyn shut book and pressed her palm over her heart. She hated how it beat faster when she thought of the Alpha King. She hated that she still remembered the warmth of his hand the night he had touched her father's sword before everything burned. The past was a wound, and it was bleeding again. The next day, the king summoned her. Marta's eyes widened when the guard arrived. "The king? He asked for you?" Evelyn, keeping her expression neutral. Vigard led her through corridors she had never entered before, gold-veined marble floors, high windows spilling sunlight across centuries of victory carved in stone. The air smelled of cedar and authority. At the end of the hall, two massive doors stood open. Inside, the Alpha King waited alone. "Leave us," he told the guards. They obeyed without question. He turned toward her slowly, as though savoring the silence. "I've been thinking about you," he said. She lowered her gaze. He moved closer. The distance between them seemed smaller every second. "When I first saw you," he continued, "I thought you looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. Until last night." Her throat tightened. Her pulse felt like thunder. He took one step closer, then another. "When I dreamed, I saw your eyes in the firelight. You were younger, scared, kneeling near me as your father begged for mercy." Her heart stopped. His hand reached out, slow, careful, hovering inches from her chin. "And then you ran," he whispered. "Didn't you?" Evelyn couldn't breathe. She wanted to deny it, to shake her head, to pretend she didn't understand the words on his lips, but her body betrayed her. The flicker of shock, the tremor in her breath, it was enough. The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "So it's true." He turned it away, pacing once, twice. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more dangerous. 5 years. You lived under my roof, among my soldiers, under my crest, while I buried the name of the girl who vanished into the night." He looked back at her then, and for the first time, she saw something beneath the fury, not rage, not pride, regret. Why? He asked. Why pretend to be deaf? Evelyn forced her hands to move, signing slowly. Deliberately, because silence keeps me alive. He watched at her fingers, understanding the meaning, if not the language. "Y'all think silence is safety," he said, "but silence kills more than war." She looked up at him sharply, eyes glinting in candlelight. He stepped closer again, voice low enough that the air itself seemed to lean in. "I don't know what the goddess wants with us," he murmured, "but I feel it again, Thebend. Stronger than before." Her breath itched. Noticed. Of course, he noticed Dot. He lifted a hand to her face, slow and steady. "Look at me." She didn't want to. But did Dot. His thumb brushed her jaw, a whisper of touch that sent sparks skittering down her spine. "Do you feel it too?" he asked, barely audible. She shook her head. The lie came easily to her tongue, but not to her heartbeat. He smiled, then sad, dangerous, knowing. "You've gotten better at lying," he said softly, "but not enough." He stepped back, letting the space between them breathe again. "You will stay close to me from now on," he said. "If danger finds you again, I want to see it coming." It wasn't a request. It was an order. But it was also protection, and that frightened her more than anything else. He dismissed her with a wave, and she fled before her legs gave out. That night, when the fortress slept, Evelyn wandered into the courtyard. The moon hung low, heavy and pale. Snow drifted across the stones. She tilted her head up and whispered for the first time in 5 years, a sound so small it barely existed. "Why him?" Her voice cracked, fragile from disuse. The wind carried it away before the walls Caldecho it back, but somewhere deep inside, the bond stirred again, warm, pulsing. A live dot in his chamber far above. The Alpha King woke abruptly, heart pounding, eyes glowing faintly gold. He rose, walked to the window, and stared out into the snow. Hadn't known why, but something in the night whispered her name. Annam he hadn't spoken aloud since the day her father died. Evelyn. The word trembled in the air like a vow unburied. Chapter 3. The king returns from war for 3 days. The fortress thrummed like a heart rediscovering its rhythm. War banners were rehung, feasts prepared, songs rehearsed. But beneath the laughter and a thin thread of fear, the kind that comes when soldiers return home, with hosts still clinging to their boots, Udric Thorn was not a man built for peace. He moved through celebration like a blade sheathed too tight, restrained but dangerous all the same. His presence drew every eye, every whisper, every half-bow that trembled between devotion and dread. And everywhere he went, silence followed. Evelyn had learned to feel his nearness the way others felt the weather. When he entered a room, the air thickened. When he left, the world remembered how to breathe. She avoided him as best she could, keeping to the healer's hall, tending to the wounded Horphus to rest. But the fortress had a cruel sense of humor. No matter how many corridors she chose, their paths seemed to converge like rivers seeking same sea. The feast of victory. The night of the great feast came with drums, torches, and the smell of roasted boar. Marta pressed a cloak into Evelyn's hands. "All the servants are required," she said, "even the quiet ones." Evelyn wanted to protest. She hated crowds. Hated the way too many voices blurred into shapes she couldn't follow, but duty left little room for choice. She wrapped the cloak around her shoulders and followed the line of servants into the grand hall. It was the first time she had seen it since the day her father died. The marble floors still bore faint scorch marks from the siege that ended the rebellion. The same golden banners hung from the rafters, now gleaming in the light of 100 chandeliers. At the far end, on a dais of black stone, the Alpha King sat upon his throne. He looked different here, not the soldier she'd seen in the courtyard, but the ruler she had once feared. Armor polished, crown glinting like a snare of light, expression carved in iron, yet when his eyes drifted across the hall and found her, Something in that mask faltered. Evelyn lowered her gaze instantly, pretending to focus on the goblet she carried. Her heart, however, refused to obey Dot as she moved it through all the tables. She caught fragments of words from the noble's lips. "She's Taylor the king noticed. Thirty one. Nounder he keeps her close, she can't gossip." Laughter rippled. She kept her head down. A goblet tipped, red wine spilling like blood across the white linen. She reached to catch it, but another hand was faster, stronger. When she looked up, Edric was there. Their fingers brushed around the stem of the cup. For a moment, the entire hall blurred away. She felt the bond surge, a pulse of heat beneath her skin, wild and electric, like the echo of a howl caught behind ribs. High size darkened, gold swallowing brown. He released the cup first. "Careful," he said, his voice low enough for only her to see on his lips. "Some stains never wash out." She bowed quickly and withdrew, but his gaze followed her long after she vanished into the shadows at the edge of the hall. The dream and the wolf, that night. Sleep found neither of them easily Dot in his chambers. Edric sat before the fire, fingers tracing the rim of a silver goblet, the same one she had nearly dropped. He didn't understand why a simple servant haunted him. He had seen 1,000 faces on 1,000 battlefields, but this one clung like smoke. When he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, a girl in chains, moonlight on her skin, eyes full of defiance and fear. Her voice, God's her voice, whispering his name just before she disappeared into the night. He rose abruptly, pacing. That dream always ended the same way, her running, his wolf howling after her, feasting of roses and ash dot below. Evelyn woke from the same memory, gasping, trembling, the taste of iron in her mouth. The bond had grown stronger. She could feel it humming through the walls, threading itself into her pulse. She pressed a hand over her heart. "Not again," she mouthed, but destinarily listens. The library whisper. The following morning, a messenger came to the healer's hall. "His Majesty requires you in the library," he said. Marta frowned. "The library? What would the king want with herbs there?" Evelyn didn't know, but she went. The royal library was enormous, shelves of dark oak rising to the vaulted ceiling, filled with scrolls older than the kingdom itself. Dust motes swirled in shafts of golden light. It smelled of ink, parchment, and secrets. Edric stood near the window, back turned, reading an old map. When he heard her footsteps, he spoke without looking. "I've been told you're skilled with languages. That true?" She hesitated, unsure whether to nod or pretend confusion. Head turned, catching the hesitation. "Spare me the act," he said softly. "You understand more than you want people to believe." Her fingers tightened around the basket she carried. He looked toward her slowly, a hunter without haste. "There's something I need translated," he said, stopping close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, one she remembered giving him years ago. He handed her a rolled parchment bound in red string. "Old script. My scholars can't read it." She unrolled it, eyes scanning the symbols, and her heart dropped. It was an old script. It was Ray cipher, the secret code her father had used to send messages during the rebellion. Her breath caught. She almost dropped it. Edric noticed. "You recognize it?" She shook her head too fast. Hesmold faintly. "You're a terrible liar." Then his tone softened, almost gentle. "I don't mean to frighten you, healer. But this writing, it was found in the ruins of your father's estate." Her throat went dry. "I think," he continued, "whoever wrote this wanted it to reach me. And now the goddess is fit to send me you." He watched at her for a long moment, then added, "If you ever decide to speak, truly speak, I will listen." And just like that, he left her with the letter and the weight of every unspoken word between them. The message back in her room. Evelyn unrolled the parchment again, hands shaking. Her father's cipher was unmistakable, curved strokes, hidden patterns within Thank. She decoded it slowly, breath by breath, until the words bled through. To my daughter, if this reaches you, then my silence has failed. Trust no counsel. Trust no crown. The wolf wears a burden he does not yet understand. When the moon turns red again, the blood of kings will seek you. Run if you can. If not, speak the truth that I could not. Tears blur out the ink. She burned out the message in the candle flame, watching her father's warning curl into smoke. But the word stayed, echoing behind her ribs. That blood of kings will seek you. It already had. The storm before the oath, by dusk, thunder rolled across the mountains. Evelyn stood on the balcony outside her quarters, watching lightning dance along the distant peaks. The air smelled of rain and iron dot behind her. The door opened. She didn't think to turn. She knew a scent now, smoke and pine, and something dangerous enough to be familiar. Y'all shouldn't be out here alone, Edric said. She turned. Lips parted in feigned confusion, but he was already shaking his head. No more pretending. Not with me. He stepped closer until the storm light caught the gold in his eyes. Your silence, Wasp Cleaver, he said, but it can't protect you from what's coming. Her fingers trembled. She wanted to ask what, but words refused to rise. He studied her face, then sighed, an exhale heavy with something like pity. The council suspects you already. They call you witch, healer, spy. I don't know which will get you killed first. Her stomach turned cold. He reached into his cloak and placed something in her hand, a small silver token engraved with the sigil of the royal guard. Show this if anyone tries to harm you, he said. It bears my mark. Her eyes widened. He was giving her the king's protection, a symbol worth more than gold. But protection always came with chains. She wanted to return it, to shake her head, but he caught her wrist gently. You saved one of my men last week, he said. The fevered boy. He would have died without you. I repay my debts. The thunder cracked overhead. For a second, lightning painted his face in pale fire. Evelyn saw something in him then, not the king, not the killer, but the man he might have been before crowns and blood made him hard. Their eyes met, and for the first time in 5 years, she forgot to look away. The bond flared, heat blooming under her skin, heartbeat sinking to his. He must have felt it too, because his breath hitched and his grip tightened, just for an instant. Then he released her, stepping back like a man caught too close to prayer. Go inside, he said roughly. Before the rain starts? She obeyed, but when she turned at the doorway, he was still there, standing in the storm, eyes closed, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. The rain and the memory. The rain Kamahivi and endless that night. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the courtyard flood with silver reflections. Every drop sounded like a heartbeat. She pressed her hand to the glass dot in the flicker of lightning. She saw her reflection, pale, tired, haunted, and behind it, the ghost of the girl she used to be. The one who ran. The one who stayed silent while her father died. Theon, who believed she could bury destiny beneath 5 winters of snow. A tear slipped down her cheek, vanishing into the soundless storm dot somewhere beyond the gates. A wolf howled, low, mournful, unrestrained. Her wolf, his wolf. She didn't know anymore. All she knew is that her silence was cracking, one heartbeat at a time, and when once breaks, it never puts itself back together again. Chapter 4, The Courtyard Encounter. The morning after the storm. The fortress smelled of wet stone and pine sap. Rhine had washed the blood from the courtyard, but not the tension that lingered in the air. Soldiers moved in disciplined silence, sparring with dulled blades, their breath clouding in the cold dawn light. From her perch above the practice yard, Evelyn watched through the narrow window of the healer's loft. wrapping linen around a soldier's bruised ribs. Her hands moved automatically, practiced and precise. But her mind was elsewhere, trapped in the echo of last night's storm and the memory of a king who had stood in their aim like a confession unspoken. He had given her a token of protection, his mark, and she didn't know whether to feel safe or hunted. Done, she signed. Patting the soldier's arm gently, he nodded, mumbling a thank you before limping off. Evelyn exhaled and reached for the next roll-off bandage, but the faint scent that drifted through the open window froze her mid-dash motion. Smoke. Iron. Pine. Before she could turn, a deep voice filled the space behind her. You shouldn't watch from shadows, healer. The view from below is clearer. She turned sharply. He was leaning against the doorway, arms folded, eyes bright as wildfire in the dim morning light. The Alpha King looked out of place in a healer's loft, too large for the space, too sharp for its quiet. His armor wash off undone, the dark leather damp from the rain. Streaks of water glinting like veins of silver across his forearms. Her pulse betrayed. Her he noticed he always did. You didn't answer the summons I sent, he said. His tone half command, half accusation. She frowned slightly. Gesturing toward her ears, I didn't hear. Hess smirked. Right, the deafness. Then Hess stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Each fitful echoed through the small room like a heartbeat too loud. Telma's a me thing, he murmured. If you can't hear, how did you know I was standing bend you just now? Evelyn's breath caught. She forced her expression to remain calm, but her fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table. She could feel his presence. That was the truth. She had felt it before hearing him, the air itself shifting with the weight of his energy, but she couldn't explain that without giving herself away. So she wrote quickly on a scrap of parchment. I felt the draft change. The scent of smoke. He read the words, eyes flicking to hers, amusement glinting like the edge of a blade. Clever, he said softly. But not enough to convince me. He moved it closer, close enough that the space between them felt charged, alive. The faint brush of his sleeve against her wrists and a ripple down her skin. Every instinct I have, he said, voice low, tells me you're lying. She lifted her chin, refusing to retreat. Her silence had always been her armor, but standing this close, it began to feel like glass. He watched at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up, not in threat, but curious, and brushed a damp strand of hair from her face. 5 years, he said. 5 years of pretending to be nothing. His eyes softened then, just barely. Why hide what the goddess clearly marked? She froze. Had he seen it? The faint scar behind her ear, the mark of the moon's bond, pale as frost against her skin. No one should have known. She had kept it hidden, always. He must have read the shock in her eyes, because his voice softened further. I remember everything, Evelyn Ray. The name hit her like a blow. Her hands trembled, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Ha had spoken it aloud, the name she had buried under 5 winters of silence. She stumbled back, shaking her head. Her lips formed the denial. No, you're mistaken. He smiled faintly. Am I? He closed out the distance again, and this time she couldn't retreat. Her back hit the table. His shin came down beside her, trapping her without touch. Thebin pulsed between them, hot and urgent, like fire trapped under skin. You think I could forget the girl who defied me in front of an entire court? He said softly, the one who looked me in the eye as her father swung from the gallows and didn't shed a single tear. Her breath broke, half gasp, half sob. Ha had seen everything. The execution, her silence, the blood moon burning behind the castle walls. You ran from me. He continued, his tone somewhere between anger and awe. And I let you. I told myself it was mercy. His hand lifted, stopping an inch from her throat. But mercy is a debt, healer? And debts are meant to be repaid. The air shimmered between them. Devin flared again, a surge of energy that made the candle flames gutter. She could feel his pulse under her own skin, his breath mixing with hers. Her wolf clawed at the surface, desperate to respond. But she couldn't speak. Not yet. If she did, the world she built would collapse. So she did the only thing she could. She raised her hand and pressed her palm flat against his chest for a heartbeat. Everything stilled. That contact was electric. She felt his heart hammer beneath her hand, fast, powerful, unsteady. His breath faltered. His gaze dropped to where her fingers rested against him. It wasn't defiance now. It was something else. Something raw and dangerous. Then she pushed him away. He didn't resist. Instead, he stepped back slowly, eyes searching her face for something neither of them could name. "You always did have fire beneath that quiet," he murmured. "I wondered if it served the snow." He turned, heading for the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll accompany me to the southern courtyard at dawn. There's something I need you to see." And then her was gone. Evelyn stood frozen for a long moment after he left. Her knees trembled. Her palms still burned where they had touched him. When she finally looked down, she saw that the parchment on the table had shifted in the wind. The ink she'd used earlier had smeared, forming strange shapes. The bond mark behind her ear throbbed faintly, glowing just enough to illuminate the edge of the table before fading again. The southern courtyard dawn came pale and cold. Mist clung to the ground, and the air smelled of wet leaves. Evelyn arrived early, wrapping her cloak tightly around her shoulders. She didn't know why he had summoned her, only that disobedience wasn't an option anymore. The courtyard was empty at first, rows of stone arches, old statues overgrown with moss, and a single fountain frozen in place. She stood near it, tracing frost on its rim. Then, from the far archway, he appeared. No guards this time. No crown, just the man, the wolf beneath the king. He wore a simple black tunic, a sword strapped across his back. The sight of him in the morning light made something twist in her chest. "You came," he said. She tilted her head slightly, pretending confusion. He smiled. "You're still playing deaf." "I see. Fine. Then listen with your eyes." He walked past her, stopping before one of the ancient statues, a crumbling angle holding a broken spear. "Do you know who this was?" he asked. "She was called Lysandra the Silent, the first Lunar Queen of Thornblood. History says she chose silence as penance for killing her mate." He turned toward her. "But the truth? She stayed silent because no one believed her voice." His gaze sharpened. "Tell me, Evelyn, how long will you let silence protect you before it kills you too?" Her breath came uneven now. He was tearing at her walls, word by word. He took another step closer, lowering his voice. "You can't hide forever. Not from me, not from what binds us." Then, without warning, he lifted her hand, the same hand that had pushed him away, and pressed it against his chest again. The bond ignited. Light shimmered faintly between their skin, invisible to the human eye, but bright as sunrise to those marked by the goddess. His pulse matched hers, beat for beat. For a moment, the world blurred, and she could feel his emotions, flashes of anger, grief, longing, guilt. It overwhelmed her. She pulled her hand back sharply, breaking the link. Her knees buckled, and she stumbled against the fountain's edge. He caught her before she fell. The Dutch steadied her and set her on fire all at once. "Enough." She gasped her first word in 5 years, rasped and fragile, torn from her like blood from a wound. His eyes widened. The sound, barely a whisper, hit him harder than any blade. "Evelyn," he said, her name half prayer, half disbelief. She blinked, realizing too late what she'd done. Her silence, her armor, her shield, shattered in that single syllable. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at her like a man seeing sunlight for the first time. I knew it, he whispered. I knew your voice. She tore away from him, stumbling back toward the archway. Her throat burned, her lungs screamed, but her mind spun with panic. 5 years of safety gone. One word, and everything was undone. Behind her, his voice echoed, deep and raw. You can run again if you want, but this time I'll follow. She didn't look back. That night, she sat in her darkened room, staring at her trembling hands. Her throat still ached from the single word she had spoken. If it sounded like a wound, like freedom, like danger, somewhere outside, the wolves began to howl, not in mourning, but in awakening. The Alpha King stood on the fortress balcony, the cold wind biting his skin. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, and whispered the truth he could no longer deny. The bond is awake. Chapter 5. The lie begins. To crack snow fell without sound. A flurry of soft knives dissolving against the warm breath of fortress. Morning kindled behind the eastern peaks and blood pale gold into the courtyard, where men stretched stiff shoulders and women hauled steaming buckets from the kitchens. The world pretended to be ordinary. Evelyn did the same. She ground willow bark until it became a soft brown powder, folded it into parchment wisps, and drew a charcoal wolf's head on each Marta's sign for pain draft light dose. The ink darkened as the room warmed. Her fingers moved with the calm of repetition. Bone knew how to lie if you taught it young. Marta's voice drifted from the hearth. You're early. Evelyn's shoulders rose and fell. She lifted the finished bundle and set it with feathers. Don't look at me like I've asked you to sing. Marta grumbled, though fondness tugged one corner of her mouth. You've been a winter ghost since the feast. Want to tell 'em why? Evelyn shook her head, lips curving in a mock apology. The gesture was old coin between them. It bought peace without change. Marta stabbed out the fire with an iron poker. The king has a way of turning quiet into questions. Watch your step, little hare. Evelyn, because nodding costs less than truth. She slipped into the corridor with her basket, and the habits that had held for 5 years. Walk between torches where the light is soft. Keep to the edges of rooms so no one tries to start a conversation. Smile with your eyes, and the world will forgive you for being difficult to talk to. The fortress breathed around her boots on stone, laughter throttled to a hum. The distant clang of metal becoming something like prayer at the landing above the southern hall. She paused. 2 housemaids stood hip to hip with a pile of napkins between them. Tongues shaping whispers meant to stick. And hell looks at her like that, one said. Cutting the air with a folded square of linen. Like what? Like hell looks at the horizon before he rides. Like he sees something there and can't decide if it's battle or salvation. The second maid sniffed, dropping a napkin too sharply. She's deaf and she's plain. She's a healer, the first corrected kinder. His men love her. She bled herself whiter during the fever. A pause. Linen continued to become order in their hands. I heard Lady Morell asked for a list of everyone who comes and goes from the infirmary. Lady Morell asks for a great many things. The second maid's mouth quirked toward contempt. The goddess gives few. Evelyn moved before they saw her. Names had teeth in other mouths. Rumor could not bone dot by mid-morning was in the lower barracks with a satchel and 2 guards, who introduced themselves as the kind of men who were always on a first-name basis with Trouble. They cracked jokes while she strapped a splint around one's broken wrist and painted. Comfrey paced along the bruise, blooming at the other's jaw. She smiled because he flinched in the right rhythm, because her hands stayed steady, because this, at least she knew how to mend. The door banged open. A boy skidded on the threshold, cheeks raw pink from the cold. Healer. His lips shaped the word like he'd brought it from a long way off. Captain says, come quick. The king, everything inside her went still. He took a breath. remembered who she was supposed to be, and resorted to pantomime, a sword whistling, a hand at a temple, a stagger. She could have read the fear without the play. She followed him through 2 courtyards and up the long stairs that ended at the training ring where, yesterday, had become a bruise on her mouth. Men cleared a path without a word. Edric stood near the rail, one hand braced on a post as if it were the only thing left in the world not worth breaking. Ronan Wasteir, which meant the matter was not small. The captain of the guard hovered, a large animal trying to look useful and failing. Between them, the open ring yawned, scuffed and scored with 100 small histories. A dark stain marketh dust at Edric's feet. Shemiel bare a soldier sprawled there, his eyes glassy, jaw clenched hard enough to crack enamel. A gash above his ear leaked thin blood. He'd been struck by a pommel by a fall, by someone who'd misjudged the ferocity of a man just finished with war. Evelyn's hands moved before thought. 2 fingers to the throat, pulse present. 3 to the ribs, breath counting its way back from a precipice. Palm to the scalp, swelling rising around the wound like a new moon. She gestured, water, cloth. They arrived like they had been waiting backstage for their cue. She cleaned the blood, propped the man's head, slid a folded cloak beneath his shoulders to keep his throat open. The soldier's eyes fluttered. She tapped his sternum twice with gentle knuckles and watched him follow the sensation back to a body that hadn't finished with him. Will he live? Edric's mouth formed the question. She lifted her gaze. His face was carved from restraint. Anger poured off him like heat merged over a road. Evelyn nodded. Once relief struck him harder than any blow. He glanced at Ronan. A small shake of the beta's head said, "Not your fault. Not this time." When they carried the man away, Edric didn't move. Only when the ring was empty did he lift his hand, and the captain bluntly quick dismissed the onlookers. Stones wallowed footsteps until only 3 remained. King, wolf, shadow. Woman who had not spoken in 5 winters and had, yesterday, let a single syllable out like a bird that didn't know cages. Edric stepped into the ring. He picked up a wooden practice sword and laid it across his bones as if weighing penance. "You came fast." She made asmal motion with her shoulders. I was asked. His eyes tracked the softness of that movement. Then cut to Ronan. "Clear us." Ronan's gaze flicked to Evelyn, a question threaded with warning. She pretended not to see either and waited until the beta's boots faded into distance. "Again," Edric said. "To your eyes." He droppeth practice sword. It clattered against the rail loud enough to make a flock take. Wing miles away, her head turned a degree before she could begin to stop it. The small off his smiles. "Better liar. Not yet a good one." He closed the space between them until the wolf in him fogged the air. "You heard Meisterday." She set her jaw, the lie a taste she'd habituated to but never learned to like. He touched her wrist with the back of his fingers, careful, as if the contact itself were an apology. The bond uncurled like a big cat waking in their shared ribcage. She swallowed. "Come," Hesed, and led her out of the ring through a door she had thought was merely askar in the wall. The corridor beyond was narrow and dim, lit by the soft ache of daylight at its end. It spat him into a small court she had never seen. Winter roses grew here, their petals bruised with frost, their scent stubborn and honest. An old well stood at the far edge, its stones worn smooth by palms and prayer. "This is where my mother taught me to fight what wasn't flesh," Edric said quietly. "Every king battles a blade. Some kings battle a story." He turned to her. The gold in his eyes had softened to whiskey. "Mine begins with a girl, Hurin." The rose made the silence smell sweeter than it was. He took a coin from his pocket, silver. Small, the kind the fortress used to keep score with itself, and held it up between forefinger and thumb. "They say witches can hear the language of metal. They say it sings to them. Tell me, healer, do you hear this?" He let it fall. It struck, fell above the well, skipped, and tumbled out of sight. Sound leapt rich and round from stone throat, reverberated up into the cold air, and died. Her head didn't move. Her breath did. He watched its breath. You flinched inside? He said it not as victory. As wonder. She wanted to bolt. Every tendon whispered the choreography of escape. He had a way of making worlds small. History conspired to help him do it. Why the deafness? His voice didn't sharpen. It smoothed. Why not a veil, a false name and a quiet tongue? Why choose to be cut off from half a world? She signed it, not to convince him, only because the truth had become heavy and needed to be uplifted by the old muscles that knew. How? Silence hides me from the bond. He understood something in that. She saw it happen, recognition slotting into place, a machine bolt from bones and prophecy finally catching. So you felt it too, he said, from the first. The rose didn't move. The air did, as if wind approached, and then decided to mind its manners. Lady Moore wants you gone, he added almost conversationally, which made the threat wear a finer cloak. She has friends who believe in old fires. Her whisper is fine dry timber. Every time you're seen near me, a spark lands. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were clean again. No soldier's blood marred them now. She had always been better with blood than with politics. Blood told the truth, politics wrote plays. Where everyone led on purpose, he reached out for her fingers and stopped before he touched them. I can keep you safe if you help me learn what you're hiding, he said. And I don't mean the deafness. I'm in the thing in you that turns light into a blade and mercy into power. He had seen the child she'd healed then. Of course he had. His palace had eyes, and some of them were human. She shook her head. The movement tasted of ash. Some truths kill when spoken. He smiled without humor. Some truths kill when swallowed too long. They stewed with the well between them, and time snarling at their heels. If she told him everything, the world would tilt. If she told him nothing, it would tilt a different way. Balance was a cruel god. It asked you to dance on a blade. Footsteps reached them before the man did. Ronan stepped through the arch with the kind-off, speed that meant he hadn't run, because running would frighten the story highbrowed. Lady Morel has moved to call a minor council, he said. Breath even, voice without seduction. Word spreads that the healer speaks after all. Servants say they've heard her voice in the corridors. Evelyn's bows lurched. A single syllable, rasped in a courtyard, had found legs and goni door to door in the night. Edric's face dyed an altar. Who carries it? House Thornwood's women, Ronan said. And 3 men who prefer the old King Sharshir laws. I've moved our pieces. It may not be enough. Edric glanced at Evelyn. Then we give them different drama, he said. Something true, if not the whole of it. No, she signed at once. His head tilted. She forced the rest through her fingers. Not yet. He studied her knuckles, the whiteness where her grip had tightened into ache. Then Beale swear, he decided. The council meets at second bell. Marta needs you in the infirmary because I say she does. Ronan's gaze flicked again to Evelyn. He was very good at making concern look like disinterest. And after, my king? After, Edric said, we begin teaching wolves to listen. He left them in the roses. Ronan lingered. You're brave, he said without admiration and without disdain. And that makes men stupid, which is useful until it isn't. I served your father because his bravery didn't need an audience. Learn from it. She lifted her hands. Will the council devour him? He shrugged, but the gesture was a tired man's shiver. Councils rarely eat with their own teeth. They use someone else's. He departed. She watched the hole the coin had fallen through until imagination fetched up its silver at the bottom. Small moon caught in a throat of stone. She did not retrieve it. Some questions prefer their depths. The infirmary called her back to tasks that didn't care who wore a crown, burns to salve, Stitches to remove. A cook whose thumb had lost an argument with a cleaver, and a boy who had swallowed a nail on a dare and now looked at the world with chastened awe. Marta gave orders like blessings and swore like medicine. Thowert cracked its knuckles and moved along when Thieschen bell tolled. Its bronze song climbed the walls and wrapped them in rhythm. Evelyn didn't go toward it. She leaned over a basin, washing blood into a pink ghost, then dried her hands and pulled fresh linen from the shelf. Herpety remembered how to belong here when her mind did not dot the durapend. A slim woman in a slate cloak stepped through, hair black as a threat, eyes the color of winter glass. She didn't look at the beds. She didn't look at Marta. She walked as if the room were a book she had already read twice and disliked both times. Evie Gray, she said too loud for a place where pain tried to sleep. Marta drew herself up to full height, which was not impressive until you saw the hands that had held men together. This is a healing hall, Lady Morel. If your tongue needs mending, I can find a gentler thread. A small smile curved the noblewoman's mouth. I prefer my threads to cut. Her gaze slid to Evelyn and stuck. You have a talent for appearing when our king requires a miracle, she said softly. Such luck offends the gods. Evelyn tilted her head like a bird hearing something under soil. I've called a council, Morel continued, so that light might fall where shadows have begun to breed. There will be questions. You will not be harmed if you are what Yucklum. She reached into her cloak and let a small object drop onto the nearest table. It rang bright, sharp, and delicate in the quiet. A silver coin worn thin by wishing. Evelyn didn't flinch. Not this time. Lady Morel's smile became genuine. It was not an improvement. Very well, she purred. Anne left with the ease of someone confident the floor would keep carrying her. No matter how far she walked, Marta exhaled like a bellows spent. I don't like her. Evelyn touched the coin, then withdrew her hand as if he had licked it. Nor do you, Marta observed. Eyes fishing for truths that wouldn't drown Dot, Evelyn lifted her chin toward the beds. Work was a better answer. Work didn't ask for blood you couldn't spare. The afternoon stretched thin. Edric did not send for her. Ronan did not reappear. The fortress kept its voice low, like a house with a patient in its care. When Thebel named the 9th hour, the door opened again, but this time it was not nobility or need. It was a single guard with a soft face who had been a boy when she first came north. Message, his mouth said. He held out a small strip of leather with a mark pressed into it, the same wolf's head she wore hidden against her skin. On the strip, 4 words had been cut with a careful knife. Tonight, East Gardens. Alone Dot, she didn't ask which hand had written orders into a thing that couldn't burn. She slipped it into the seam of her sleeve, finished binding the cook's stubborn thumb, and went to stand by the window where twilight rubbed the world's ed simpler. The East Gardens lay under the fortress like a thought the stone kept having. Frost-silvered thorn and trellis. The fountain held a skin of ice that tried to pretend it was stronger than it was. Evelyn walked the path a servant would take if she wanted not to be remarked upon. She did not hurry. Haste makes the night nosy. He was there before her, which meant his impatience had outrun his pride. The moon should not make a king look young. It did. I thought you wouldn't come, he said. Words carving steam into the cold. She lifted a hand. A small apology to the air for existing inside it. The council snarled and went to sleep. He went on. Ronan fed them other meat. It won't hold. They want a trial. They want a confession. Her pulse climbed a rung. And you? Her hands asked. His mouth softened. I want the truth you can give without dying. She looked past him to the fountain, where a curl of ice had broken and the water beneath breathed like a lung. Silence pressed at her throat, asking for old rent. I read your father's confession the night you arrived, Edric said quietly. It took me till yesterday to believe it wasn't written by a ghost who hated me. She turned it back to him. The name was a blade between them. "I killed a good man," he said, not with drama, only with accuracy. "I did it young and certain. Certainty is a drug. It makes mercy look like weakness and questions feel like treason. If the goddess put you in my path to punish me, she's chosen a softer whip than I deserve." She breathed. "The world didn't break. I can't protect you from them," he added. "I can't protect you from me if you keep bleeding. The wolf in me doesn't let go of prey. Perhaps that is why we keep losing gods." It wasn't quite a smile that rose in her mouth. It was a warmth that remembered how to happen. She touched 2 fingers to her throat and then to her lips. A promise, not an apology. A promise anyway. His ice raked her hands as if her fingers had turned into oracles. "Tomorrow," he said in an inhale, "we start with smaller truths." He stepped back. The bond tugged, petulant as a tethered thing. She tasted its impatience and its joy. She hated both. She cherished both. When shuddered to go, he stopped her with 2 syllables, so soft they shouldn't have made the air move at all. "Be careful." The east gate spat her into a corridor colder than the night, darker than doubt. She moved through it with the confidence of someone who had built part of its shadow by hand. And still halfway to the infirmary, she paused. Someone waste there. The kind of there that wore patience instead of cloak. "Little healer," a voice said, amused and almost sad. Not Edric, not Ronan. A third note, unfamiliar and already too intimate. "Your steps sound like prayers." She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The smell came first, crushed mint, old paper. Askler's perfume hidden in a predator's pocket. She resumed walking. He didn't follow. Some men enjoyed only the reminder that they could. When she reached her door, she slid the bolt and leaned her spine against wood, as if it would do more than keep out weather. The moon found her cheek through the small window and held there. Her throat ached where a syllable had ripped its way out yesterday. It would ache worse tomorrow. She lay down without undressing, one palm over the token he'd given her, the other over Theblis in her chest, where the bond slept like a lion with its eye cracked open, somewhere far away. Water found the coin at the bottom of the well. It kissed it once, like blissing, and moved on. Morning would come with Tess. She could feel the shape of them already, like wolves waiting under trees. She had run for 5 years and learned this simple fact. Tess always find the runner. This time, she would stand. Chapter 6. The wolves test. The fortress did not sleep that night. Rumor prowled its corridors and bare feet, whispering to candles, scratching beneath locked doors. Bimmering. Every servant knew the tale. That a healer who spoke. Evelyn felt it before she heard it, a shift in how the soldiers looked at her, an extrabiat of silence after her name. The ear itself seemed to listen. When she reached the infirmary, Marta already knew. "They're sniffing," she said, wringing out a cloth too hard. When wolves smell a lie, they don't ask whose scent it is. They tear the world until it stops bleeding. Evelyn's hands trembled as she tied her apron. Marta got the motion, but said nothing more. Some fears didn't need translation. The summons at midday, Apage appeared, small, nervous, eyes too big for his face. He held a folded scrap sealed with black wax, the royal crest. Evelyn's breath hitched. Shouldn't open it. She didn't have to. The wax alone was command enough. When she entered the great hall, the world was waiting. Edric stood at the far end beside the shattered window that had never been repaired, a scar of wind and light cutting through stone. Ronan waited behind him, posture rigid. Lady Morale lingered near the throne, where Inga's smile that belonged to a knife. The guard's aft door closed it after her with a sound that echoed like judgment. Edric turned. "Healer?" His voice was unreadable, smooth, deep, and laced with something colder than anger. Curiosity sharpened into weapon. He descended the steps slowly, every footfall deliberate. "You've been busy making the court talk," Hesed. That's a difficult trick for a woman who cannot hear. She kept Tarkus down, her body a mask of humility. He circled her once, wolf to prey, never touching. They say you heard me drop a coin yesterday. They say you turned your head toward a sound you shouldn't know existed. They say, she spoke. Lady Morel interrupted, savoring the word. In the courtyard. Evelyn just tightened. Edric didn't look at Morel. They say, he repeated softly, that you spoke. He stopped in front of her. Look at me. She obeyed. Slowly, carefully. His eyes were gold again, not the color of warmth, but of a predator deciding whether hunger was worth the risk of the trap. Perhaps, Hesed, the goddess will settle the matter herself. He gestured toward the training ring. Walk with me. The ring of truth, the training yard, was empty. Snow covered the sand in a thin sheet, turning bloodstains into ghosts. Evelyn stood at the center while Edric circled her, boots crunching softly. Rona remained by the gate, expression carved from granite. Morel lingered outside of bars, hands clasped, her smile patient as poison. Edric spoke without raising his voice. When I was a boy, my mother taught me the truth of the bond. She said it was not love. It was recognition, the soul remembering itself in another. Sometimes that, Marie, is mercy. Sometimes it's war. He drew a dagger from his belt and let it drop. If it was snow, with a muted thud, Evelyn didn't move. Good. Hammer mirrored. Again. He snapped at his fingers behind her ear, sharp, sudden. Her body betrayed her. A flinch, small but fatal. Ronan's jaw tightened. Lady Morel's smile widened. Edric's tone stayed almost gentle. Perhaps that was instinct, he said. Let's see what else your instincts remember. He reached out for a wooden training sword, swung it once, twice. The air sang with the movement. On the third swing, he brought it down hard against a post. The crack exploded through the courtyard. Evelyn's hands flew to her ears. The world stopped breathing. Edric's single quotes as gaze darkened. Morel's voice was sugar poison. Your Majesty, the witch reveals herself. Silence. His snarl cut her words to ribbons. He turned it back to Evelyn. So you can hear. Her pulse hammered. The lie was ash now, impossible to swallow. She dropped to her knees, not from fear, from exhaustion. The weight of pretending had finally crushed the bones that carried it. For 5 years she had lied to live. Now she would live because she had lied. She raised her head slowly, meeting his gaze. The cold burned her lungs when she drew breath. Yes, she whispered. The word slipped through the air like a blade unsheathed. The bond unleashed, the snow stirred. The air shimmered. Somewhere deep inside the fortress, a wolf howled, low, wild, claiming. Light burst from beneath her skin, thin veins of silver tracing the shape of the mark behind her ear. The same light flared beneath his collarbone, glowing through leather and flesh. The bond, dormant for 5 years, awoke. Ronan swore softly under his breath. Lady Morel stumbled back, eyes wide. Goddess above. Edric didn't move. The glow from his mark pulsed in rhythm with hers, heartbeat for heartbeat. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer the king's. It was the wolf's. You ran from. Evelyn's throat ached. You killed my father. I spared you. You spared a witness. The words cracked like thunder. The bond flared brighter, burning the frost from the air. He stepped closer. She didn't retreat. The bond doesn't lie, he said. You belong to me. No, she whispered, tears freezing on her lashes. The bond belongs to the goddess. She made it. She can break it. He seized hers. Power surged between them, raw, untrained, electric. Snow melted in a circle around their feet. For one heartbeat, she saw what he felt: rage, guilt, longing, confusion, and beneath it all, the ache of a man who had forgotten how to forgive himself. She tore her hand free. If you want truth, she said, voice shaking but steady, Then hear it. I pretended to be deaf because the world doesn't hurt what it thinks can't hear it. Something inside him broke. He turned it away, staring at the shattered post where his sword had struck. Then you chose the wrong world, he said quietly. He strode tough gait. Ronan, dismiss the lady. Morel protested, words sharp as ice. Edric's growl ended them. Out. She left, her silence louder than speech. Aftermath, only the three of them remained. Evelyn still knelt, the light fading from her mark, leaving her skin cold and pale. Ronan approached carefully, as one might approach a sleeping god. What now? Hissed. Edric didn't answer at first. He ran a gloved hand through his hair, breath steaming and theckled. Finally hissed. Now we find out who taught her to hide from a bond. Ronan hesitated. And if she taught herself, then just stronger than any witch they fear? He looked back at her. You will stay under guard until I decide what to do with you? Evelyn rose slowly, her legs unsteady. Then decide quickly, she whispered, because the council won't wait. His eyes met hers, fire and storm colliding. Let them come. He turned and walked away. Ronan followed, throwing her a look that was half apology, half warning. When the gate closed, she was alone in the courtyard. The wind hissed through the broken window above, scattering snow across the melted circle where she'd stood. She pressed a hand to her throat, feeling the echo of her own voice, strange, fragile, alive. It had taken everything from her to speak once. It would take everything again to serve what came next. The watcher. That night, she dreamt of her father's voice. Not the way he sounded before the gallows, but the way he did when he taught her how to read the stars. The goddess does not speak to men, he'd said. She whispers to women who remember her silence. When she woke, her window was open, snow dusting the sill. A silver coin lay on her table, the same coin Lady Morel had dropped in the infirmary. Only now, a message was carved into its face. One voice can end a king. Her blood ran cold. She crossed their room, closed the shutters, and pressed her back against the wall. The fortress felt suddenly alive, breathing, listening, plotting. The council wouldn't wait, and neither would destiny. The king and the wolf far below. In the ward chamber, Edric poured himself a cup of black wine. Ronan stood by the window, watching the torches flicker across the courtyard. She spoke, Ronan said quietly. You hurt her. You saw what the bond did. Edric nodded once. Then you know what comes. The council will call for trial by moon. I won't hallow it. You may not have a choice. Edric's hand straightened around the cup until the metal bent. She was 17 when she ran. 5 years of silence. 5 years of fear. And still she came back into Thailand's den. Ronan's eyes flicked toward him. And you want to believe that means fate? It means something, Edric said. I just don't know if it's salvation or punishment. He set the cup down and looked toward the northern windows, where the storm clouds gathered like a prophecy. Tomorrow, he said, we test the bond. Ronan frowned. How? The werewolves test everything, Edric replied. By fire. Evelyn didn't sleep again that night. She sat on her bed, candle guttering low, the silver coin turning between her fingers. Somewhere below her chamber, the Alpha King walked the corridors alone, listening to the ghosts that carried her name, and for the first time in years, both prayed to the same goddess, not for forgiveness, but for time. Chapter 7, the witch's accusation dawn found the fortress counting its own heartbeat. Snow had crested into a thin, brittle glaze. The sky wore the pale blue of a blade dipped in water. Somewhere, a raven scolded the morning, and the morning scolded nothing back. Marta pressed a steaming mug into Evelyn's hands. Drink, she said. Looks like tea, works like courage. Evelyn held the mug for the heat more than the flavor. Sleep had skirted her bed and refused to be caught. The silver coin lay face up on her table, its carved three winking like a bad star. One voice cannoned a king. "It isn't your voix they fear," Marta muttered, noticing the coin. "It's that you still have it." The bell called the first hour. The day stood up from its knees, and with it, the court.word arrived before breakfast clothed itself. The council would convene at second bell for matters of sudden import. No one bothered to hide the reason. In kitchens and wardrooms and laundry alcoves where steam soughed the air, a single word boiled up again and again, which Marta tightened the ties of Evelyn's apron, hands brisk to disguise shaking. "Let him shout," she said. "We've work." Work came in waves. A scullion with a burn from a pan he'd sworn wasn't hot. A soldier whose new boots had lied about their kindness. A seamstress who'd greeted her needle like an enemy and lost. The small aches of a great house tried to make a fortress of bone dot at second bell. The door opened. Ronan filled the threshold with quiet and purpose. His gaze swept the cots, counted breathing, found Evelyn, and didn't pretend relief when he saw her standing. "Summons." Hesed simply. Marta stepped between them before Evelyn could lift her hands. "She's working." Now she summoned. Their eyes met and struck sparks nobody had time to watch burn. Marta's jaw shifted. "Then I go with her," she said. Ronan shook his head. "No one enters this hearing without invitation. Not even the walls." He held out a black-cloaked arm. Evelyn touched Marta's sleeve, the old sign that said "I'll return." Even if it didn't count to keep its promise, and went. The council chamber was a cathedral built for wolves. Cold, tall, precise. Columns rose like trees that had learned manners. Banners hung like captured wind. The dais at the far end held the throne, and the shadow of everyone who had ever sat it too long. They had packed the room. 12 alphas lined the crescent, their house marks stitched at shoulder and brow. House retainers clustered by rank and proximity to power. Servants lingered where gossip could turn into testimony if you looked at it too hard. Lady Morel stood in a spill of light as if she had arranged it. The color at her mouth had been sharpened to a weapon. When the doors shut, the sound felt like a verdict. Edric stepped onto the dais with the economy of a man who no longer owed the world an explanation for his presence. He wore no crown. He did not need one. Ronan took his place at the king's shoulder, all angles and oath. "Speak," Edric said. The word rolled through marble and spine. The High Chancellor, a narrow column of a man with parchment where other people kept Thumer, lifted the ivory staff. "This council meets on the petition of Lady Morel of House Thornwood," he intoned. "She alleges witchcraft, deception, and bewitching of the crown by the healer known as Evie Gray." A rustle of breath. A tightening of shoulders. Wolves pretending to be reasonable. Lady Morel stepped forward, palms open in the pantomime of piety. "Your Majesty," she said, voice honeyed and hard, "I bring accusation not as enemy, but as servant. There is a corruption in these halls. The goddess sends omens to those who will see them." She turned, the sweep of her cloak a study in stagecraft. "This woman, this healer, pretends at affliction to curry sympathy and hide sorcery. She has been seen to hear what she should not, to turn from a sound she claims cannot touch her, to heal with light and not with hand." Ronan's mouth made no shape at all. Edric's eyes did not blink. Morel let Silence collect like coin, then spent it. "I call witnesses," she said. They lined up where duty and fear had told them to. A kitchen boy stammered through the talief, a goblet falling, and the healer's head turning. A maid described a whisper in them and the way the air had changed when it was spoken. A stable hand swore Toa. Night he'd seen silver under the healer's skin as a child's fever felt like a curse undone. None do trait. None told the whole of truth. Truth rarely survives a stage. When she had stacked the kindling high, Lady Morel lifted the torch. "Consider the king's mark," she said, turning to Edric with theatrical sorrow. See how it flares when she is near? There's old magic at work, the kind that takes kingdoms down to a bone. A murmur rippled, sudden as geese startled into air. The High Chancellor looked to the dais. Your Majesty? Edric descended a single step, the floor acknowledging his weight. You bring accusations, he said to Morel. Where is your evidence? She spread her hands to the room. It stands before you. The goddess is not a chorus of frightened servants, he replied, almost bored. She speaks betrayal. She speaks by ordeal. And she spoke once already. A flicker crossed Morel's face. The labyrinth. He was counting it in her column. Share covered quickly. The trial of shadows tests the soul, she said. It doesn't expose the craft that rides it. And what craft rides yours? Ronan asked pleasantly. Laughter cut the tension like a baker's string. It died when Morel looked at Edric again and had not bothered to beautify her fury. I ask for the trial by moon, she said. Let the goddess judge under her own light. Let the healer stand before the court and call down the blessing she claims. If she burns, we are spared. If she stands, we are warned. The room leaned forward. Trial by moon was older than kings. The accused went to the lunar stone before the company of fools. A cup was poured at blessing or a poison, depending on what the goddess decided and what men arranged. The innocent claimed the cup and lived. The guilty grasped it and died. It made murder look like faith. Edric's jaw flexed. He held the chamber the way a storm holds a plane. No, the words slid into the hall and froze there. Morel didn't blink. Then you protect a witch. Ronan's hand moved, a small, almost idle shift that rebalanced the room around it. He protects his right to decide when and how wolves are fed tonight. Wolves? Morel's eyebrow climbed. Is that what she is? Edric descended another step. The light caught the scar through his brow. The linnet had made cruelty look like history instead of taste. His voice went softer. It traveled farther. You grew up with stories, he said to the room. So did I, in yours, witches come to doors and leave plague behind. In mine, men come to doors and leave justice behind. The difference is largely costume, he turned to Morel. You hate what you can't shepherd. That's not piety, that's hunger. Morel's composure cracked just enough to be useful. Color flared high on her cheekbones. You risk your throne for a servant's silence, she hissed. He looked past her to Evelyn, who had stood like riverstone while the chamber tried to break around her. His gaze warmed by a degree. Not her silence, he said. Her choice. It should have ended there. Pride can sometimes be taught to sit. The fear is bad at obedience. It leapt. A lord from the western marshes, a man whose beard did most of his talking, rose. The king speaks of choice while a curse blooms on his chest, he said, pointing not at Edric but at fate. We all saw it flare when she stood in the yard. That light made mock of law. I will not have old ways drowned by pretty language. Others followed. A narrow-shouldered alpha from the river packs. A woman with hair like a hawk's wing, whose clan had been at war with Evelyn's blood long before either of them had been born. The room took sides the way ice cracks, sudden, inevitable, loud. The High Chancellor struck the staff. Order. Order turned, resentful. Your Majesty, he said, words careful. You can refuse a trial by moon. You cannot refuse the council's vote to call one. Ronan's eyes moved. Edric's did not. Then call it, the king said. But hear me. If you'll move against her before the moon is full, I will move against you before the sun is down. The threat lay on the floor and steamed. Until then, he added, she is under my protection. Under your protection? Morel echoed, a quiet horror. Or under your spell? Edric's head turned slowly until his gaze cut her as a different kind of blade. Choose your words, he said. You don't bring enough blood to buy the wrong ones. The gavel fell. The council scattered in clumps of triumph and fury. whispers already breeding smaller whispers that would be truer for having been repeated. Evelyn remained where protocol had nailed her. Only when the chamber exhaled did Ronan approach. Come. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. Wolves with the jaw don't herd. They sear. They took Kernet to the dungeons. Edric was not looking to teach Fear a new trick, but to Thea's wing, a suite of rooms, too fine for a prisoner and too secure for a guest. Guards at either end of the corridor nodded without expression. Their hands rested near hilts, not on them. The difference was a king's. Inside, the fire had been coaxed into cheer. A tray weighted with bread and something that pretended to be soup better than it tasted. Ronan set a sealed letter on Theodable. Read this when you are alone, he said. She picked a tap, thumb skimming the wax, the wolf's head pressed deep. It felt like promise wearing danger's clothes. He remained by the door. There are 4 ways this can go, he said without flourish. 1, the council forces a trial by moon and rigs the cup. You die. 2, they force it and fail to rid the cup. You live, and we have a different war. 3, the king finds proof of treason in Lady Merle's house before the moon rises. The trial collapses. 4, you run. Her hands moved before she could stop them. Running ends it. Ronan's mouth twitched with something like pity. Running ends nothing. It only changes who does the chasing. I have chased long enough to know. She gestured to the seal. What is this? A truth, Hesed, and a map. He left. Evelyn waited until the corridor swallowed his steps, then broke the wax. The letter inside was short and free of poetry. There is Alliger beneath the East Archive floor. The stone with the wolf carved wrong. Lift it. The truth you need begins there. Our beneath, Asukan hand had added 1 line, sharper, less patient. Do not go alone. Ishii stood with paper and pulse. The room shrugged its shoulders around her and became ackage. She could feel the walls, listening for the sound of decisions. Marta would have called it a bad idea. Marta would have locked the door from the inside and the outside, and then asked the goddess to keep the key lost. But Marta loved her like a wound you survived. Love tries to keep blood in, not truth out. At dusk, Ronan returned with a tray and a look meant to be a warning and allowed to be Applin. Eat, he said. Then walk with me as if you were going somewhere else. The East Archives smelled like old thunder, the kind that comes from pages that remember too many storms. Torches coughed. Dust took a bow each time a shelf breathed. Ronan led herpes rows of vellum stiffened. Histories and into a narrow aisle where the stone floor kept its own counsel. He knelt, counted 3 flagstones from the wall, and brushed hisses. Palm across a carven wolf whose ear curled inward instead of out. He slid Athen blade between stones and pride. The flag lifted with a reluctant sigh, O fawn old man being asked to stand. Beneath it, a shallow cavity. Inside that, Alliger bound in cracked red leather and tied with twine. Don't smudgeth. Edges, he said, because sometimes men say absurd things when their hearts are loud. They open-ended it on the floor. The writing that stared back was elegant and cruel. House Thornwood accounts, purchases, payments, names dot and then, a list of tonics and tinctures bought in quantities. No. Household would need night dash bloom extracts, crushed aconite, powdered silver, Wolfsbane multiplied by moon phases. Money to priests who did not belong to any temple recognized by wolves. Ronan taped a date with his forefinger. This is the week the child in the kitchens went in for 3 days, he said. They blamed the fever. They were feeding it to look like fever. They turned Abag, Morel's seal. A signature the color of dried anger. Evelyn's breath shortened. On the last leaf, a note for the chalice, the concentrated draft. Administer at toast. Witnesses ready. Blameve which the room tilted and leveled beneath her feet. She pressed her palm to the floor until stone remembered her body. Ronan shut book and slid it back. Now we know, he said. Knowing is not yet winning. They replaced the flagstone, covering truth with ordinary. When they reached the corridor, they didn't hurry. Running teaches walls to speak. At the bend, a figure stepped from shadow and made both their bodies choose where to put higher weight. Edric. He looked from one to the other and then to the dust clinging to their knees. You went without me, he said. Ronan single quotes, Smouth. You said do not go alone. I meant me, Edric replied. Then to Evelyn, softer, are you hurt? She shook her head. He exhaled long. Come, he said. I've invited a guest to meet us in the gardens. They walked under a sky that had given up explaining itself. The frostbitten rose remembered yesterday's argument with the sun and pretended not to be interested in tonight's. By the fountain, a woman waited with a cloak pulled too low. She pushed it back. Alpha Kira of the frostborn eyes like lake ice, hair braided in a crown that looked accidental and never was. You called, she said. Her glance skated to Evelyn, paused, returned to Edric. You killed both of us. I need ears that don't belong to Thornwood, Edric said, and eyes that aren't in my skull. Kira smiled without kindness. We have those. Ronan's hand closed around the ledger concealed beneath his cloak. He offered it. She didn't take it. Don't give me a thing you want me to swear to later, she said. Tell me why I should place my pact between you and a house that has never liked Miss Snow. Because if Morel poisons a king in my hall, then blames a woman for the death she planned, Edric said, your daughters will learn what that kind of victory buys. And it wouldn't be anything you want them wearing. Kira's eyes schooled further, a paradox that required her and achieved itself anyway. When? Soon, Ronan said. They moved today. Trials like spectacle. A moon makes a crowd. We have you on in 3 nights. Kira not a dance, solemn as a gavel. I will bring what I can carry without anyone knowing I have it. She looked at Evelyn as if tasting the shape of a rumor. You're smaller than the stories, she said. That's useful. Stories get you killed. When she was gone, Edric turned to Evelyn. The garden soft him. Maybe it was habit. Maybe the moon did it. Maybe some places refuse to host cruelty. 3 nights, he said. Then the goddess stands where the court pretends to. Evelyn's hands. And if the cup is rigged, then the first man who lifts it dies, he said simply. And the second, if I have to make a point. It was not heater in his mouth. It was policy. Until then, he added, you stay where I can find you when the walls start lying. In the east wing, guards nodded again as they passed. Inside her chamber, the fire had learned to warm better. She stood with her back to the door until her breath remembered math. Then she crossed to the window and pushed it open. Cold laid balm against her face. The sky looked full of old paper where stars might have been if stories were kinder. Behind her, the door clicked. Edric entered, closed it, leaned back against the wood the way she had. A mirror a few heartbeats late. They will press me, he said. They will say the throne loves a witch. They will ask if I love you. The word startled the room. He didn't snatch it back. What will you say? She asked. It came out broken and brave. He smiled like a man who had found a knife in a pocket he'd forgotten. I will say the throne loves the goddess's law. I will say I love this kingdom enough to let it fate me for a while. His gaze held hers until the bond rose, and the air remembered how to shiver. And I will say that when the moon is done judging, I will ask you a question that doesn't belong to councils. Silence rested between them. It did not weigh what it used to. When he left, she did not bolt the door. She sat on the rug and held her own hands so they would stop translating what her heart kept saying. In some other wing, Lady Morel bled her finger and wrote names in a book that liked butter than ink. In the barracks, soldiers sharpened blades that wouldn't be used and practiced dying in their heads so they'd be worse at it when the time came. In the wolves' yards beyond the walls, a mother licked frost from a pup's nose and the pup sneezed. And the mother didn't learn from it. The moon climbed the sky like someone unsure about heights but determined to arrive anyway. 3 nights. An accusation coiled itself around a cup. A kingdom held its breath to see if truth would be a cure or a spectacle. Chapter 9. The King's Confession. The fortress slept the skittish sleep of a household that had watched a miracle and didn't know what to do with the day after. Banners hung as if listening. Torches guttered, tired from holding the moon's attention. Somewhere a kitchen lad dropped a ladle and apologized to no one. Snow skinned the roofs in pale armor and creaked as it shifted. Evelyn stood in the east corridor with her hand against a window pane that had learned winter by heart. Frost feathered the glass. Her breath drew ghosts. Below, the courtyard circle of scorched stone, where the chalice had melted and the poison had hissed glimmered like a coin the night had decided to keep. The bond pulsed once, a quiet knock beneath her skin, then went still again, as if to say, I am here. I will not speak first. Behind her, the door opened without a knock and closed with a decision. Walk with me, Edric said. She did not startle. Since the trial, fear wore different boots. She took her hand from the window and found him in the doorway unarmored, unadorned, a cloak thrown across one shoulder the way men throw sleep, careless and needed. The gold in his eyes was banked. When he held out his palm, it was not a command. It was a road. They crossed the silent hall and descended to a passage. Evelyn had not walked stone old enough to remember builders' names. No guards this way. No servants. Only wolves carved into pillars, their faces worn smooth by centuries of touch. The air smelled like rosemary and cold iron. He led her through a narrow arch and into a chapel the fortress had built for itself. When kings were still an experiment, candles crowded the walls. A cracked skylight framed a sliver of night. In the center, a slab of marble served as altar and table both. No icons watched them, only the clean bones of architecture. Edric closed the door. I asked Ronan for an hour, he said. He will make the world obey. His voice had lost its court. It was lower, roughened, intimate as a bruise. She stood where the candlelight wrapped her in gold and admitted nothing. Her silence was not the old, kind, weaponized absence. It was a place to set heavy things down. He did not circle her like a judge. He walked to the altar and laid both palms on it as if it could cool something inside him. You should hate me, he said without preface. The words fell and rang as if copper had struck stone. I did, she answered, surprising them both. He looked over his shoulder. Did. She touched her throat, where the taste of last night's poison had long since burned itself into holy ash. Hatred was easy before the goddess took my hand, she said. She is poor at letting us keep simple stories. He turned back to the stone. The set of his shoulders looked like a man bracing for sea. The night we hung your father, he said, and the chapel inhaled. I was new to the crown. The council sharpened my certainty daily. They fed me names like bread. They told me fear was governance and mercy a rumor our enemies paid bards to sing. His thumbs pressed into marble until the color left them. I believed them. I believed my own hunger to be right. Evelyn moved closer because distance felt like a lie and this room preferred accuracy. She did not interrupt. He had asked for an hour. Let him spend it where it hurt. I read his confession the night you arrived, he went on. Not the one the court paraded. The one your father wrote for a reader who might survive him. His mouth bent toward something like a smile that refused to grow. I read it 3 times and then sat in the dark and tried to hate him anyway. I could not. And yet you said nothing, she murmured. He took the knife of her voice and let it cut. I said nothing. He did not trim the ugliness. I wanted proof I could wield in daylight. I wanted to keep my counsel cowed and my throne obedient and my gods polite. I wanted to be right in public more than I wanted to be merciful in private. He let the confession sit between vowels. I am not proud of the arithmetic. The candles hissed. Wax made small rivers. He turned and leaned his hips against the altar's edge, crossing his arms as if he feared his hands would otherwise build something reckless. He studied her the way men study whether they know they cannot order. Last night, he said, when you put your mouth to that cursed cup, I remembered the first time I saw you. Not at court, before. Her breath snagged. The chapel shifted, the floor becoming midday blood had been made public. You were a child trying not to be, he said. And I wanted to call you brave, but I settled for enemy because it was cheaper. He dragged a hand through his hair, scattering the careful. The bond woke in me that night like a kill. I mistook it for hate because I understood hate better. Evelyn looked at her own hands clean, capable, guilty of nothing but living. I felt it too, she said to the stone more than to him. I thought it punishment. She lifted her head. Sometimes still. He took 2 steps, just 2, and the space between them contracted like a muscle pulled. He did not touch her. The bond touched for him, that shy heat patting across skin to curl near her pulse. I need to say things I cannot say with witnesses, he said, voice lower, a gravel road to something tender. And I need you angry enough to answer them with honesty. Try me. I knew you could hear, he said, before I dropped the coin. Before the courtyard. I knew, and I tested you anyway. He watched the offense land, then did not flinch away from it. Part of me needed you to fail so the law would let me keep you. His jaw clicked shut on the end of the sentence as if it disliked its own taste. Their fury, quick and bright as the slice of winter air under a door. Not the old rage that had kept her warm in the mountains. A new one, born of being seen and injured by the same pair of eyes. Keep me, she repeated, and the echo belonged to the girl who had run until her solace bled. Like a hawk. A relic? A wife? Alive, he said. It was too bare to be pretty. Alive where my enemies couldn't invent you while I slept. And what of me? She took a step closer to recklessness answering recklessness. What of the choice you said you defended in council? Does it end where your fear begins? His throat worked. No, then hear mine. Her voice held, steady as stitchwork. I lied because every truth pinned to me became a blade for someone else to use. If I said my name, they sharpened it. If I admitted the bond, they would have hanged me for bewitching the king. If I explained the magic in my blood, they would have dug my mother from her grave to put her on trial too. She spread her hands small, scarred, unadorned. So I kept what was mine. He had the decency to look wounded. And in keeping it, you kept part of me caged with you. He exhaled long. I am not asking forgiveness for the tests. I am asking you to hit back. She did. You want confession? She asked, and the chapel's candles leaned toward her like boys at a tale. Here is one. I came to this fortress to save a child. I planned to take your coin and flee before you returned. Then you turned, and I knew the bond was awake again, and my first thought was, it would be a mercy if I died before he recognized me. Anger moved in his eyes. Not at her. At a history that had made her say it. Here's mine, he said in answer, voice going quiet, dangerous. The night before the trial, I considered running you out under guard to a border I could not watch. I wrote the order, sealed it, and put it in the fire. He looked down at his palms as if expecting ink to have tattooed itself there. Cowardice wears 100 coats. That one fit easily? The words hung heavy, then began to breathe. Why didn't you? She asked when her ribs allowed it. The bond, he said simply. And because I am tired of making fear look like law. They were close enough now to feel the heat of the other's breath. The skylight showed a coin of sky that had not yet decided whether to keep snow. He reached into the inner pocket of his cloak and pulled a small object wrapped in cloth, the color of funerals. He unfolded it and set the thing on the altar between them, a ring of dark gold, heavy, carved with a moon, pierced by a blade ray work, old and meticulous. There was dried blood in the groove where letters ran. ER, the metal had remembered warmth. I took it from the jailer after the gallows, he said. I don't know why. I hated trophies. Perhaps I hoped guilt would be a talisman if it weighed enough. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the ring and did not touch. The chapel blurred at the edges. Bastone's breath sounded loud. Her father's hands, ink-stained, calloused from reins and blade, had worn that circle. You kept this, she whispered. I kept all I could not undo, he said. His voice frayed. If you wish, I will throw it from the highest battlement. If you wish, I will put it in your palm and leave the room. She took the ring between forefinger and thumb, the way she took needles when returning them to a tray. It was colder than she wanted and warmer than it should have been. She held it until her hand stopped shaking. Waiter, she said. Truth built some of this room. It can wait for the rest. He nodded. He was learning when not to win. A draft found the seams in the door. The candles wavered as if something large had passed just outside fate, perhaps, or tomorrow. He braced his palms on the altar again and bent his head until his forehead touched stone. The pose read as prayer until he opened his mouth. I would undo that day, he said into rock, into the low belly of the fortress. I would cut the rope with my teeth if I had to. I would swallow whatever poison men like Morel brewed rather than let it touch your father's skin. And I would stand in the courtyard when you were 17 and call you by your name and tell the world to shut its eyes while we remembered how to be human. The bond surged with his words, not as magic, as truth, an ache that healed and hurt for being honest. Evelyn closed her eyes. Her hands had learned to stop blood and to start breath. Now they shook with the effort of not reaching. She opened them and found herself moving anyway, the smallest step, the kind that changes maps. Edric, she said. It was not title. It was not accusation. It was something like invocation. He lifted his head. I cannot give you forgiveness as tribute, she said. It would be counterfeit and you would know. But I can put my hand on the scale you carry and call it balance. Is that a yes? He asked, half smile carving itself like mercy into his mouth, or a stay of execution. It's a stay of judgment, she said, until we have all the evidence and both of us have learned new languages. He inhaled like a drowning man meeting air he hadn't bragged about. Fair, silence settled again, not timid, not hostile. A big cat stretched across the floor, patient. The skylight paled. Dawn pried its way into the cracks of night. Somewhere above them, a cock thought of his profession and pledge. You said there were things you cannot say with witnesses, she said, back to the first road. Say them. His gaze slid away and back. No one had told him kings were allowed to be shy. When you touched me at the fountain, he began, the bond gave me details I did not earn. The tips of his ears darkened. The candlelight made him look younger and worse at lying. Your fear, your first memory of snow, the way you count your breath to swallow a sob, the scar on your knee you got falling from a wall you climbed to prove a dare, not for escape. His mouth tilted, and the shape of your voice when you say my name in your own head. Heat climbed her throat. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the holiness that comes uninvited when someone names you accurately. And you? She asked because reciprocity is a currency that buys trust. What did it give me? His pupils dilated as memory dragged across them. The sound I make when I wake from the dream, he said softly. How I hold knives when I don't trust the room. That my right shoulder aches before snow, that I wanted to mark you the first day because I am not a saint and I am tired of pretending that wanting a thing ruins it. The honesty put its hands on her and held. You did not, she said. No. His jaw set. Because marks should be vows, not victories. They stood breathing the same prayer. The altar, the ring, the candles, witnesses old enough to keep secrets. Outside, someone dragged a broom across flagstones and civilization staggered toward morning. There is a war coming, he said at last. Not the kind that makes songs. A war of papers and pockets, poison and prayer. The North sniffs for weakness. The river packs want tribute and call it tradition. Morale's allies scatter, but stones thrown into a pond become circles long after they sink. He stepped nearer, not hunting now, asking, I will fight it on the floor and at the table. I will make law a weapon that doesn't draw blood. But in the quiet places, the rooms like this, I need you. As weapon? She asked, one brow lifting, daring him to be foolish. As compass, he said. As the person who looks at me when the bond is loud and says, that is love, not law, put it down. Or, that is law, not justice, break it. The part of her that had lived 5 years with a false name and an empty mouth weighed the request. It looked at the ring. It looked at his hands. It looked at the circle burned into the courtyard and the ashes of a chalice and the ledger, still sleeping beneath a wrong-eared wolf in the floor of the archive. Then it nodded. I will be cruel when it saves lives, she said, and kind when it saves souls. He smiled like a man who had been given a map to a place he had drawn in childhood but thought he'd imagined. And I, he said, will learn to listen. The hour he had bought was nearly spent. Ronan knocked once on the far door, a courtesy between men who had bled together, then left them the privacy he had guarded. Edric reached across the space and took her hand, not her wrist, not her elbow. Her hand palm to palm, fingers sliding until their grips learned each other's paths. The bond rose, curled around the join, and settled like a warm animal against their knuckles. No light flared. They didn't need spectacle. They did not kiss. They did not bow. They stood and did the harder thing, decided. Truth trembles, he said. More to the room than to her. It will stand when it's ready, she answered. He released her first. The way men do when they remember a woman's liberty is not a gift, but a fact. He tucked the ring's cloth around the metal and slid it into her satchel. When you want it, he said. When I can carry it, she corrected. They left the chapel by the door that faced east. Day had begun to pour itself between buildings. Servants collected dawn like kindling. Somewhere a pot sang. Somewhere a child laughed like a new blade being struck in a good forge. The fortress shook itself and remembered how to be a home that kept the wolves inside and the winter out, dotted the corridor's mouth. Edric stopped. The court would begin to gather its faces soon. The council would find new instruments for old music. Marta would scold and feed and swear and keep the world sewn. Before all that, he turned, and his mouth made confession one more time without sound. I am yours if you ask. I am not yours if you do not. She let the truth tremble once between them like a string plucked in an empty room. Then she touched his forearm light, deliberate, and walked away. He watched until the corner took her. Only then did he breathe out above. The cracked skylight of the chapel held a thin slice of sky that had chosen blue. Candles guttered, giving themselves to morning. On the altar, where 2 hands had rested and a ring had remembered heat, the stone looked less like a tomb, more like a table. A place where, someday, 2 people might eat the same bread and call it peace. Chapter 10. The imprisoned moon, the fortress that had once murmured her name, now spoke it only behind closed doors. By the 3rd dawn after the king's confession, silence returned, but not the kind Evelyn had chosen. This one was imposed, heavy, humming with suspicion. The moon had waned to a thin blade, pale and watchful above the battlements. It seemed to be listening. The arrest she had been in the infirmary, wrapping a boy's sprained wrist when the doors burst open. Steel flashed. 4 guards. 1 word. By order of the council. Marta rose, fury blazing. The council can order soup from me, nothing else. The captain didn't look at her. Evelyn Gray, you are charged with treason against the crown and practice of forbidden craft. Evelyn's pulse froze. Treason? The king does not know, the captain said quickly, as if that made it cleaner. The order came from the council itself. That was worse. Much worse. Ronan was not there. Edric was in the Western Valley, meeting emissaries from Frostborn. Timing like this was no accident. They bound her wrists with silver-threaded manacles that bit but did not bleed. Marta shouted until they shoved her back. The last thing Evelyn saw before the door closed was her mentor's hands, trembling around a broken mug. The dungeons beneath the fortress were older than kings. They smelled of rust, damp, and secrets never meant for air. They chained her beneath the light of a small grated window, the moon a thin scythe peering in. The silver burned her skin in quiet pulses. The bond dulled to a whisper, as though muffled by distance or fear. Hours folded into themselves. The door opened only once for water, once for the council scribe who read the charges in a voice as dry as sand. Conspiracy to seduce the sovereign through enchantment. Manipulation of royal will. Use of divine light without sanction. Assistance in her father's rebellion reborn. The last one made her chest twist. Her father's rebellion had been years ago, a failed dream of a freer kingdom. She'd been 13 when the soldiers came for him, 17 when the rope finished what politics had begun. Now they were his ghost as armor against her. When the scribe left, she pressed her forehead to the wall and whispered to stone, "Father, they're using you again." The stone mercifully did not answer. Memories of fire sleep came as it always did in ambushes. She dreamed of the night her father died, the torchlight, the hiss of rope, the way the moon hid behind a cloud like a coward. He had told her then. Through the bars of his cell, when the moon looks away, it's only so she can't be accused of mercy. Now, chained beneath that same indifferent moon, she finally understood. She woke with the taste of smoke in her throat. The corridor outside echoed with footsteps that didn't hurry. Ronan came without a torch. The guards didn't stop him. He smelled of frost and rain night air clinging to his cloak. When the door opened, she almost didn't recognize him. He looked older. The kind of older that isn't years, but choices. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I'm aware." He knelt, inspecting the cuffs. His voice was low. Morel's allies bribed the chancellor. They forged a decree while the king was gone. The council voted. You were guilty before dawn. Her stomach turned. And Edric? Still in the valley. His escort was delayed by an avalanche. Ronan's mouth curved bitterly. Convenient, isn't it? He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small vial glass, cloudy with some faintly glowing substance. This will melt the silver long enough for you to slip free. She stared. You're helping me escape? I'm giving you a chance not to die in a cell built for his enemies. Her throat tightened. If I run, they'll call it confession. They already have. He met her eyes. The difference is whether you live long enough for the king to learn what they've done. The bond flickered, faint but present Edric's heartbeat echoing distantly through her veins, uneven, worried. He'll come for me, she whispered. Maybe, Ronan said. Maybe not soon enough. He poured the liquid over the cuffs. They hissed, metal softening like wax before cooling again. He caught her wrists, steadying her trembling hands. When you reach the eastern gate, take the path through the birches. Follow the river until it splits. Go north. The Frostborn owe the king one debt they haven't yet paid. She searched his face. Why are you doing this? He hesitated. Because your father once spared me. In another life, in another war. He said mercy was a seed. Maybe I'm finally letting it grow. Her voice softened. Ronan. But he was already standing. He drew his dagger and pressed it into her hand. If they find you before you're gone, use this. Aim for the throat. Don't think. The dagger's hilt was carved with a wolf's head. She traced it with her thumb. I never thought you believed in me, she said. I don't, he replied. I believe in what you make other people become. He turned to go, then paused in the doorway. Edric told me once that silence can be loyalty. I think he's learning it can also be war. Don't waste the lesson. And then he was gone. The escape the vial's magic still shimmered faintly. She pulled up the manacles. They gave with a sound like weeping. Freedom came sudden, violent, unbelieving. She rubbed her wrists until the skin stopped glowing red. The corridor outside was empty. Somewhere above, a bell told third watch. She moved barefoot, her steps soft as prayer. Each corner carried risk. Each torch shadow could hold betrayal. When she reached the stair, voices drifted down guards trading gossip, the lazy laughter of men who thought their prisoner too chained to matter. She slipped past while they argued about ale. The upper hall smelled of wax and cold wind. Every door looked like safety and WAs and single quotes T. She found the east. Corridored by memory, the way Edric's hand had once guided her through it, the curve of the window that caught the moonlight like water. It led to the GATEHO, U guards. One dozing, one half awake, she tightened her grip on the dagger. The wolf's head glinted. She didn't want to kill. She wanted to live. When the awake one turned, she moved swift, silent, the blade across his throat before sound became choice. The second never woke, blood steamed in the cold air. Her stomach twisted, but her feet kept moving. The betrayal of the gate was a head iron lattice, half frozen. Beyond it, the night stretched wide and merciful. She could smell pine, river, freedom. Then a voice cut through the dark. Going somewhere, healer? She turned. Lady Morel stood in the archway above the courtyard, flanked by armed men, of course. The serpent was too clever to flee before the king returned. She had waited here to finish the game herself. Evelyn lifted her chin. You lost your trial. Morel smiled. Trials are for believers. I have friends who trade in results. She descended the steps, each click of her heels deliberate, echoing off stone. The council needs a villain that isn't them. You fit perfectly. I'll tell Edric what you've done. You'll tell no one. Morel's smile didn't falter. Because by dawn, you'll be hanging beside your father's name. The guards moved in dot. Evelyn stepped back, searching for gaps, counting breaths. The dagger trembled in her hand. Then movement. A shadow slipped from behind the well, fast and silent. A knife flew, catching the nearest guard in the neck. Another fell before his cry finished. Ronan. He was everywhere and nowhere, a blur of steel and breath. Run, he barked. She did. Arrows hissed. Stone splintered. She ducked beneath the portcullis as Ronan cut the rope, holding it half closed. The gate crashed down behind her, sealing him in. Ronan. She screamed. He met her gaze through the bars, blood running from his shoulder. Go, he said. That's an order. Then Morel's soldiers surrounded him. The last thing Evelyn saw was his blade flashing once before they dragged him down. The river she ran, through snow and forest, through breath that burned and air that tore. The moon guided her thin, crooked, bleeding light through trees. The river appeared as he'd promised, black and alive. When she reached the fork, she stumbled to her knees, chest heaving. Behind her, the fortress lights glimmered faintly gold against blue. False warmth against truth. She pressed a hand to her heart. The bond pulsed weakly, as if reaching for her across distance and pain. "Edric," she whispered. "They've taken everything." The river answered with silence. She knelt there until the cold bit through her clothes, until her body shook with exhaustion. Then she rose and followed the current north. The moon hid again, thin and watchful. And far behind, in a cell that still smelled of her absence, a single silver manacle lay broken on the floor, its edged with the shape of a wolf's head. Chapter 11, The Trial of Shadows She Chooses Not to Run. Enters the goddess's labyrinth to prove her soul. Faces illusions, guilt, and her reflection. The summons arrived like a knife wrapped in velvet dot. By dusk, the banners had been lowered, half-mast for reasons no one could name aloud, and the fortress had begun to speak in low voices, as if anything louder might wake a god who did not enjoy being woken. Torches bled along the corridors. The air was winter clean, heavy with rosemary and iron, as if the stones themselves had been scrubbed for ceremony. Evelyn stood in the antechamber, outside the old chapel, with frost purling at the edges of her breath. She had a choice, and the choice had a smell. Snow about to fall, horse sweat, oiled leather. If she took the North Passage now, if she put one foot, then the next again, she could be over the second wall and into the birches before the bells finished telling the hour. She could be a shadow among shadows, a rumor that slept in caves and woke only when the moon was too thin to notice. "Run," said instinct. The voice that loved her because it wanted her alive at any price. "Stand," said the memory of a man with ink on his fingers and a rope burned across his throat. When the moon looks away, it's only so she can't be accused of mercy. Evelyn set her palms flat against the cold door and felt the chapel breathing on the other side. Somewhere within, the oldest law in the Silver Dominion waited on a stone table, the labyrinth of the goddess. Carved when wolves still argued with the wind and the wind sometimes conceded, Ronan appeared out of torchlight coat unbuttoned, hair refusing discipline, the look of a man who knew how much an hour weighed. "It isn't too late," he said quietly. "I can open the east gate. We can claim confusion and a missing key." Evelyn's mouth went dry. "If I run now, they'll write the end of my story for me." "They already have. Then let me tear out a page." Ronan's gaze flicked to the door. "The labyrinth doesn't test skill," he said. "It tests the soul. It won't care how many lives you saved with herbs, or that a boy in the kitchens calls you miracle when he thinks no one listens. It will ask what you are when no one can see you." "Good," she answered, before fear could edit. "That's the only answer I trust." He studied her as if measuring the distance between caution and faith. "There's a cord inside," he said at last, the concession of a soldier to a pilgrim. "Moon thread. If you tie it to your wrist into the altar ring, it will always lead you back to the beginning. If you cut it, the beginning will refuse you when you're done. And if I leave it untied," he didn't smile, "then you're mad or holy." A pause. "Sometimes both." The door opened without hands. The chapel exhaled cold incense and something older. Evelyn stepped through. It was not a temple so much as a memory of one. The vaulted ribs of the ceiling met in a star. The cracked skylight admitted a coin of night. On the stone in the center lay the labyrinth, an inlay of white marble and black, spiraling inward until the eye lost its way. At its heart, a ring of hammered silver jutted from the floor, the altar's tether, and beside it, a small spool of cord that glinted like frozen spider silk. Ronan remained at the threshold, a promise not to follow. "I'll keep the door," he said. "No counselor enters until you've had your say with the goddess." Evelyn nodded, because her tongue had remembered humility too late to be useful. She crossed to the center, knelt, and touched the cord. It was warm alive in the hand, humming faintly like a hell breath. She tied one end to her left wrist, then to the ring. then hesitated. To enter was to agree that the first truth would not be the last. She drew the knot tight. Moon of my mother, she whispered. If you have anything but silence for me, I'll hold it. She stood at the labyrinth's threshold and stepped in. The first turn went easy. A child's game traced with a finger on a winter window. The second narrowed until her shoulders brushed stone. The third widened into a hallway that pretended to be ordinary until the candle flames along its walls began to burn backward blue down. Gold up, their smoke pooling on the floor like mist dot at the fourth turn. The world changed. She was 14 again. Standing in the long corridor of Ray Manor on the night men in black leather taught her what the word search meant. The mirrors along the wall had been veiled. The tapestries had been torn down and shaken to reveal secrets that had never learned to speak. Someone had broken the little statue of the goddess her mother kept near the east window, the one with a crack in the thigh and a garland of dried rosemary that changed with the seasons. Evelyn bent to pick up the face, and the face became her own. Shards reflected a girl with blood on her chin, tears making rivers through dust. Behind her, distant like thunder, the sound of a crowd learning cruelty. Wake up, she told the memory. You don't have time. The memory lifted its eyes. They were gray and too old. It comes anyway. Evelyn stepped forward and bled her knuckles on the glass. The corridor dissolved into fog. The next chamber was a dining hall that had put on its crown of candles and invited ghosts to sit. Her father occupied the head, handsome and harrowed, ink smudged along his thumb. Across from him sat Edric as she had first seen him young, righteous, execution tucked like a second tongue behind his teeth. Between them, a table laid with a feast of unchosen futures, goblets of night, platters of ash, bread that steamed but refused to feed. Which would you like? Asked Edric, easy and pleasant, as if choosing pain could be civil. Evelyn reached for the bread. It dissolved into smoke in her palm. Truth then, her father said gently, and his voice the way she saved it, summer river, whetstone, a roughness that meant he had spoken hard words all day and would speak soft ones for her now. This isn't a court, little Wolf. It's a mirror that thinks. Then it will be cruel, she said. Mirrors are only cruel if you ask them to lie. Edric lifted his goblet, peered into it, frowned. I used to think my duty was a sword, he said, not to her, not to anyone. Now I think it was a wall built to look like a sword, so men could pretend they were brave when they were only obedient. You hung me, her father reminded him. Not unkindly, I know. And you would again? Edric looked at Evelyn, and for a moment, the boy vanished and the man took his place, the one who had cupped her face with hands, that knew how to be gentle after being weapons too long. No, he said. Not with what I've learned to carry. The table blurred. The chairs scraped back all by themselves. Evelyn closed her hand around nothing and lifted it like a hilt. I forgive neither of you, she said to ghosts who had earned and unearned it. Not yet, but I won't let forgiveness be the only language I learn. The hall sighed like a lung and let her pass. The labyrinth tightened again, then opened into a room so small that it had no right to be a room at all. Light came from nowhere. The walls were wet with condensation and the smell of rain on stone. In the center, on a block of dark marble, sat a basin filled with water that did not ripple. Though her breath troubled the air, she approached, looked in, and met her reflection, not as she was wind-burned, braid-frayed. Healer's hands stained with rosemary and blood, but as the world had named her these 5 years, witch, traitor's daughter. The king's mistake. The council's excuse. The face in the water smiled. Its teeth were too white. You pretend it's silence. It said in Evelyn's voice, the one that belonged to no one else and everyone else at once. You think muteness is a shield. You think a closed mouth can't be used as a weapon. But what is a rumor if not a voice that learned to walk without an owner? I know what I am, Evelyn said. Do you? The reflection tilted its head. A liar? A survivor? A woman who would drink poison on a guess? A girl who watched her father die and learned the wrong lesson? What lesson did I learn? That love is a trial, said the water, and not a promise. Evelyn swallowed. In the stillness, her heartbeat sounded like a knock. What else could it be? Both, said the water. Either, neither. It is not your God. It is your companion. Stop begging it to absolve you and ask it to walk. She forced a breath deep into tight lungs. And my silence was a miracle until it became a shrine. The reflection lifted one hand. Evelyn's lifted with it. You have worshipped your own quiet. Now it wants ties. I stayed alive, Evelyn whispered. Yes, the water agreed. At a price you chose not to count, which was trust. The words struck and echoed. Trust in the goddess. Trust in your own power. Trust in the bond you hate for choosing you. The basin began to tremble. Cracks stitched the surface like spider silk. The reflection broke, then reformed, not witch, not saint, not weapon, just a woman in winter with a mouth she could use, and a voice that sometimes needed to be still, but did not need to be absent. I don't know how to be that, she admitted, throat tight. Then learn, said the goddess who does not speak. And the water went still. Evelyn touched the surface. It was warm as breath. The corridor beyond ran long and straight, then bent without permission. Somewhere far within the walls, a heartbeat matched her own, the bond running like an underground river she could neither dam nor divert. She followed it until the path left her at a door made of no material she knew, a sort of darkness hammered flat and set on hinges. She pushed. Windswept ridge unrolled before her, snow in whirls. Stars spilled like salt, the horizon a low bruise red, as if dawn or battle or both waited below it. At the ridge's edge stood a figure cloaked in fur, back to her, gazing north. Edric? Hope leapt and checked itself. The figure turned. She faced herself the age she would be if she survived this year and the next and a few more after. That cheekbones a little sharper. From hunger she had chosen rather than endured. Eyes clearer because secrets had been replaced by work. A thin scar cut her lower lip like a solved riddle. The woman wore no crown. She didn't look like she needed one. Who are you? Evelyn asked, though the answer had already tasted her mouth. The one who did not run, the woman said simply. The one who forgave in the right order. The one who learned to count victories that don't look like songs. Evelyn's ribs felt too narrow. And if I fail? You will. The woman's smile was precise and kind. Then you'll fail better. And then you'll fail in ways that build houses for those who come after. Wayne tore at them and took nothing because nothing loose remained. Down in the valley, torches moved like constellations gone to earth. The sound of wolves carried soft, questioning, as if the night had asked a thing and the pack had agreed to think about it. Does he live? Evelyn asked. The childishness of it made her flinch. He dies every night when you are not there to tell him that breath has a reason, the woman said. And then he lives every morning because he remembers yours does too. What of my father? It was the first time she had asked in a tone that didn't expect a lie. He is where men go when they love the world and were not allowed to be gentle with it. He is proud. He is also busy. Stop making your grave do all the work of your faith. Evelyn closed her eyes against the sting. And the goddess? She will keep answering you with silence until you learn the language. The woman reached out and touched her unmarked ear, light as snow. When you pay the price you will pay, let it be an offering, not a punishment. How? Call it by its name. Don't lie to yourself about what hurts and why you chose it to. The ridge shuddered. A crack split the sky. The woman stepped back and became light, then shadow, then a trail through both. Wait, Evelyn said, too late for cleverness. Tell me what I am. Wolf's memory set her future. And a door. The world folded. She stumbled into the final chamber, breath raw, palms nicked, left wrists burning where the moon thread had chafed. The room was round and windowless, the ceiling low enough to make the neck remember humility. In the center, a single column rose to shoulder height, and on it lay the last test. 2 knives, the twin of each other, one with the hilt wrapped in pale leather. One dark. A voice she didn't hear spoke anyway. Choose which hand to wound. She looked at the knives and knew the riddle. One blade would cut truth and leave her free to carry it. The other would cut lies and leave her free to speak them. No third way. No polite evasion. A wound either way and a gift. The goddess had grown tired of her talent for evasion. Evelyn reached for the dark-hilted knife, paused, reached for the light instead. Paused again, then laughed once a sound with more bone than mirth. I'm done letting the world trick me into choosing. Between honest pain and beautiful self-betrayal, she said to the stone, and the silence and the god who pretended not to care. She set both knives aside, curled her fingers into a fist, and struck her on chest just once, just hard enough that breath left, returned, and remembered its path. I have cut myself enough, she said when she could speak. From now on, I bleed for what I decide, not what I am forced to choose. The knives darkened, then melted like frost at noon. In their place lay a single coin, silver hammered thin, a moon on one face, a mirror on the other. She set it on her tongue, the way a child sometimes tests metal. It tasted like rain. The labyrinth sighed, satisfied and a little amused, and the floor began to unwind beneath her feet. The moon thread tugged her wrist, gentle as a mother leading a sleepy child from a feast. She followed it back through corridors that didn't exist now that they had taught what they came to teach, through the dining hall where no one sat, past the basin that reflected no one because it had already been used properly, along the passage where the candles finally remembered how to burn. She stepped over the threshold and into the chapel. Ronan blinked like a man coming back from the kind of prayer that isn't a prayer so much as a refusal to move. How long? She asked. He considered, then shrugged. The kind of time that changes people. Her wrists were raw. Her throat tasted of storms. She loosened the knot at the ring and unwound the moon thread. It coiled in her palm like a tame living thing. She tucked it inside her bodice, near the place where breath turns into voice. Ronan's gaze went to her mouth, down, back up. Did she speak? She never does, Evelyn said. I listened anyway, and I will stop making my silence do all the work my courage should. A corner of Ronan's mouth surrendered to approval. The council will demand to see you, he warned. They can have my face, she said. They can even have my fear. My soul is busy. He stood aside, offering the door. The corridor beyond had not changed, but she had. The difference made the stones choose to notice her, as if they finally recognized the name she had kept hidden under her tongue dot at the chapel's mouth. Ronan said, If you had run, I would have called you wise. I would have called me afraid, she answered. Both can be true. But only one would have let me sleep. He nodded. The king is returning, I know. She surprised herself. I heard it in the labyrinth and the way the wind counted. You're mad, he said, but like a compliment. Or holy, she said. Sometimes both. They walked toward the throne hall that would soon be a storm, toward poison that had already been poured, toward a confession the size of a kingdom. Behind them, in the chapel, the labyrinth waited for the next soul. Patient as Winter. Evelyn put a hand to her throat, felt the coin's small weight against skin. and did the hardest thing she had learned all night. She chose not to be quiet when a voice would serve. She chose not to be loud when silence would save. She chose to speak only what would carry, and to carry only what would speak. Outside, the moon lifted one thin shoulder of light as if to say she had, in fact, been watching all along. The bells began to call a gathering. Evelyn drew breath, the kind that knows its purpose, and stepped into the corridor's brightness without flinching. The goddess said nothing. The world started listening. Chapter 12. The bond unleashed. The truth explodes in the throne hall. Poison, betrayal, confession. She finally speaks after 5 years of silence. The throne hall smelled of iron and incense, two things meant to cover fear. Every torch burned straight, no flicker, no mercy. The banners hung without breath. Even the air seemed to hold itself still, waiting. They'd called it a council of reconciliation, but everyone in the room knew better. This was a reckoning. Evelyn stood at the center of the hall, the moonlight slicing across her face through the cracked window above. The same window where she'd once stood silent before the Alpha King. Now, she was no longer silent. The gathering storm. Edric sat upon the throne, the weight of armor gleaming like a cage around his body. Ronan stood at his right hand, one arm bound in a sling from the northern skirmish. Lady Morel, impossibly still alive, waited among the council gaunt, pale, smiling like poison saved in a chalice. They dragged her back from the dungeons to test the king's mercy. Everyone knew it was bait. The council filled the seats like vultures circling meat. Murmurs swelled until Edric lifted a single gloved hand, and silence obeyed. Bring in the accused, the High Chancellor announced. Evelyn stepped forward. Chains no longer bound her wrists, but memory made her skin ache as if they still did. The crowd gasped softly. Rumors had said she fled or died or turned into a shadow wandering the north. Instead, she stood eyes clear, braid neat, no crown, no fear. The goddess's coin glimmered faintly at her throat. The accusation. Lady Morel spoke first, her voice silken with self-righteous venom. She stands here because the goddess enjoys tragedy, she said, not because she deserves mercy. She bewitched you, my king. Her blood is the same that once sought your throne. She drank poison and lived unnatural, divine, or both. And tonight, enough. Edric's voice cracked through the hall like a storm-breaking bone. The room stilled. He rose, descending from the dais, every step echoing like judgment. 5 years, he said quietly. 5 years she kept my kingdom alive in silence. 5 years she healed my soldiers, my children, my people, while you whispered, while you plotted, while you were faith like perfume. He turned to Morel, and his eyes burned gold. You mistake her silence for guilt. I've learned it was grace. Morel smiled, did not falter, and yet she hides from truth. Ask her, your majesty, what did she see in the labyrinth? What bargain did she make? Why does the goddess favor her when she owes you no confession? He growled, but Evelyn's voice soft, clear, terrifying in its calm cut through the hall. She owes me one, she said. Edric froze. It was the first time she'd spoken in his court in 5 years. Her tone carried weight, not volume. The kind that silences because it refuses to tremble. The confession, I hid my voice because truth. In this court kills faster than poison, she said. And I have seen enough graves dug by men pretending to serve gods. Her gaze swept across the council, steady, unflinching. You call me witch because you fear what you cannot name. But I have walked the labyrinth. I faced the goddess who answers only in silence. I saw the truth you bury beneath your laws. She took a step forward. Your loyalty isn't to the goddess. It's to fear, to control, to the illusion that power is purity. The air shifted. The bond stirred between her and Edric, golden threads sparking faintly under her skin. The hall began to tremble, not from sound, but from truth. She looked to the king now. Edric Thorne, Alpha of this kingdom. You wanted to be right more than you wanted to be whole. You hung my father believing it would buy you peace. You kept my silence believing it would save you from guilt. It did neither. The words hit like arrows. He didn't flinch. He stood bare before the world, letting her truth flay him. Ronan looked away. Morel's smile cracked like old porcelain. Evelyn's voice softened. But you also gave me a chance to live when I no longer wanted to. You taught me that mercy is a choice, not a miracle. And her throat caught, emotion bruising her voice. I forgive you. Not because you asked for it, but because I'm done letting your sin own me. The bond erupted. A pulse of golden light exploded through the hall, slamming into stone and flesh alike. Torches flared. The great doors flew open with a sound like thunder. The banners of every house rippled as if wind had a will again. The mark behind her ear blazed. The twin mark over his heart burned in answer. The poison Morel screamed, not in pain, but in fury. She drew a dagger from her sleeve, the same silver etched with runes of betrayal. If I can't kill your silence, I'll kill your voice. She lunged. Ronan moved, but he was too far. Evelyn didn't move at all. The goddess did. The dagger stopped an inch from her chest. The metal hissed, melted, and dripped to the floor like wax. Morel's hand burned black. She shrieked, dropping to her knees. The bond roared between Evelyn and Edric alive, awakened, divine. Golden fire circled them, swallowing the air. When the light dimmed, Morel was gone. Not dead, simply gone, erased like a name scratched from stone. The hall was silent. Every soul bowed its head not to the king. To her, the awakening Evelyn turned, her body trembling, power still humming under her skin. I never wanted thrones, she whispered. Only peace. Edric took a step toward her. And yet the goddess made you my equal? She shook her head. No, Edric, she made me your mirror. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as the healer, not as the fugitive, not as the girl who hid her voice, as the woman who had survived him and beside him and beyond him. He knelt. Not as king, as man. Then let the world see what we already know, he said. That the goddess speaks through those who dare listen. Evelyn exhaled. For the first time in 5 years, her silence broke entirely, not by command, not by fear. By choice, she spoke her father's name, the goddess's name, her own, and the hall filled with light. Aftermath, when it faded, the kingdom's banners no longer bore just the wolf's crest of House Thorn. A second emblem joined its silver threads in the shape of a moon. The sign of the healer queen. Ronan bowed his head. The bond's awake, he murmured. And it's watching. Evelyn turned to Edric. The glow had softened, the fire settling into warmth. What happens now? He smiled faintly, voice raw. Now we rebuild. And we learn how to speak together. The moon rose high above the shattered window, whole again. For the first time, its light did not look like judgment. It looked like forgiveness. Chapter 13. The queen of no crown, the court is divided. She saves Edric at great cost, losing her hearing for real. Love blooms in the quiet aftermath. The kingdom woke to thunder without storm. The night after the throne hall burned with holy light, the walls of Silver Keep still trembled, not from war, but from wonder. The goddess had spoken without words, and everyone who had witnessed it now scrambled to decide what it meant. For some, Evelyn Ray was a miracle. For others, a heresy wrapped in beauty. And for the council, she was the most dangerous thing of all proof, that the goddess could choose outside their grasp. The divided court by morning. The throne hall had become a battlefield of opinions. Messengers rode to border towns. Priests argued with generals. Even the royal scribes quarreled over how to record what had happened. Some called her the Moon-Touched. Others whispered the Witch Queen. Every title was a wound dressed as a crown. Evelyn wanted none of them. She stood at the window of her chamber, the first she had ever called hers, looking down upon the city below. Where the fires of rebellion once burned, candles now glowed in thousands of windows, offerings, prayers, fears. They weren't sure if she was their savior or their undoing. Neither was she. Edric entered without ceremony, as he always did now. No guards, no counselors. Just a man who carried the smell of steel and rain. "They're demanding an inquest," he said quietly. "They want the high priestess to confirm your divinity." Evelyn turned. "They want a cage what they can't define. They always do." He moved closer. "I can silence them." She shook her head. "No, let them speak. Let them doubt. The goddess doesn't need believers. She needs witnesses." He smiled faintly. "You sound like prophecy. Maybe I'm just tired of men who mistake fear for faith." The bond hummed between them, soft, alive, familiar. Since the awakening, it hadn't burned or bound. It simply was like breathing. And yet, beneath it, something darker stirred. The assassination, the first attack, came during Dusk Court. A soldier of the Eastern Regiment, a man who had sworn loyalty to the crown, approached with a sealed letter. He bowed low, offered it to the king, but Evelyn saw it first, the faint shimmer of the envelope's edge, the unnatural stillness of his hand. Instinct screamed, "Edric?" She shouted the word tore through her throat, the second time she'd used his name aloud since silence broke. He turned just as the letter burst into flame. She moved faster than thought. Her hand caught the burning paper. The magic inside erupted like a trapped storm. Light slammed into her chest, throwing her back across the marble floor. The explosion shattered glass. Smoke filled the air. Guards rushed in. Ronan tackled the assassin before he could draw another blade. But Evelyn lay still, the cost when the fire dimmed. Edric was already kneeling beside her, his hands shaking as he pressed against her pulse. She was breathing, but the bond was wrong, dim, muffled, like trying to hear through snow. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, lips moving. He saw the shape of her words, but heard nothing. "Evelyn?" His voice broke. "Evelyn." She blinked, confused, touched her ear, then his lips, realizing silence, not chosen this time. Not forged as armor. Given as sacrifice. She smiled weakly, tears burning her eyes, and mouthed, "It's all right," but it wasn't. The healers came, tried every charm, every herb, every whispered prayer. The fire had burned through magic itself. The sound had simply ceased for her when they left. Edric stayed. He sat beside her bed, his hand locked around hers, refusing to let go. "You saved me," he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear it. "And I don't know how to live with that." The aftermath days blurred. She healed physically, at least, but the world had gone quiet in a way that felt eternal. The courtiers who once feared her now pitied her. The priests called it poetic balance. The council called it divine justice. Edric called it unbearable. Yet Evelyn adapted. She learned to read lips faster, to catch words through the shape of them, to let her silence guide others instead of herself. When Edric spoke, she would touch his chest to feel the vibration of his voice, the living proof that sound still existed. Even if she could not hold it, the bond grew stronger in that absence. Sometimes, when he thought of her, she felt it, his worry, his warmth. His words like phantom music under her skin. The night in the gardens one evening. Under the silver bloom of moonlight, he found her in the royal gardens. She was kneeling by the old marble fountain, the one cracked by centuries of frost, her hands resting on its edge. He approached quietly, afraid of breaking something sacred. She turned, smiling, as though she'd felt his presence from miles away. He signed the words with clumsy fingers. The way she'd taught him. "It's cold out here." She signed back, teasing. So warm-hearted kings worry about weather now? He laughed, and she didn't hear it, but she saw the joy in his eyes and returned it tenfold. He knelt beside her. You should be asleep, Dot, so should you? He hesitated, then signed slowly, deliberately. Do you regret it? Saving me? She shook her head. Then she reached out, took his hand, and pressed it to her heart. Her lips moved. He read them easily. It was never a sacrifice. It was a choice. The moon poured silver over her face. For the first time, he noticed the streak of white running through her hair, the goddess's mark. She looked ethereal, timeless, untouchable, but when she looked at him, she wasn't a goddess. She was a woman who had loved, lost, and still chosen to stay. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. No vows, no titles, no declarations. Just two hearts learning the language of silence together, the queen of no crown in the weeks that followed. She refused the crown he offered. I don't need it, she wrote in his hand, her touch sure and soft. A crown sits on the head. I'd rather rule in hearts. And she did. She healed the wounded, taught the children of soldiers to read, sat with widows in their kitchens instead of on thrones. The people began to call her the Queen of No Crown. The title spread faster than any decree, because they saw her not as royalty, not as relic, but as hope.love, and the quiet Tedric would find her in the library, fingers brushing ancient text. In the courtyards, laughing soundlessly with children. On balconies, gazing at the moon that once punished and now protected her. He learned her silences the way others learn hymns, each pause, each sigh, each glance a sentence. He spoke less, felt more Dot when they stood together, the court quieted. Not from command, from awe, because even without sound, they spoke a language older than words. The goddess watched from the night sky, no longer the judge, but the witness. Her silence had found its successor. Chapter 14, the war that followed Peace, new rebellion brews. Rivals challenge the union of king and witch queen. She fights beside him as an equal. Whispers before dawn peace lasted exactly 33. Days not long enough for the snow to soften, for laughter to return to the market, for children to learn her name without fear. Then the ravens came, black wings carrying. Red wax and rebellion. Letters spread like rot through the noble houses. The king kneels to a witch. The moon speaks treason through her silence. The goddess demands a crown returned to mortal hands. By sunrise, the word witch queen had crossed half the kingdom. By noon, soldiers in the western frontier refused their oaths. By dusk, torches burned beneath the banners of House Vereen, the same family that once helped hang her father. Evelyn read the first letter by candlelight in the council chamber. Her expression didn't break. She merely folded the parchment once, twice, and set it in the fire. Let them come, she signed. Edric's jaw tightened. They will. The seeds of war the council fractured like glass under pressure. Half demanded Evelyn's exile to restore divine order. The rest demanded her coronation to secure the goddess's blessing. Neither faction understood her at all. We don't need another crown, she wrote in neat, patient script before sliding the parchment across the table. We need unity or we'll drown in our own pride. The chamber erupted anyway. Edric's fist silenced them. While you squabble over what to call her, he said, my scouts report 5,000 rebels marching under Varen's crest. Decide if you prefer her at the throne beside me or at the walls saving your lives. None spoke after that. The ride north. They left the following dawn. Evelyn rode beside Edric, not behind him. Not in a carriage like royalty, but on a white Mars streaked with gray. Armor light enough to move, heavy enough to mean it. The goddess's coin hung at her throat, catching sunrise like a blade. Snow fell in slow spirals as they passed the outer walls. Citizens gathered to watch. Some bowed, some whispered, some wept. A small boy reached out as she passed, holding a wilted sprig of rosemary. She took it, tucked it behind her pauldron. For protection, he mouthed. She nodded, though she couldn't hear. The first blood that ambush came at the bridge of Lorne. Arrow rain from the cliff's black fletching. Poison tips, Ronan's shout carried through the chaos, cover the queen. She didn't need it. Evelyn dismounted, rolling into cover, hands pressed to the earth. She felt the heartbeat of the land, the pulse of every soldier, every wolf within miles. The bond surged, wild and molten. For a heartbeat, Edric felt what she felt, his blade becoming her hand, her sight becoming his instinct. They moved as one. Where he struck, she shielded. Where she faltered, he filled the gap. The battlefield sang a duet without sound. By nightfall, the bridge belonged to them again. The council's betrayal victory didn't end the whispers. It fed them. While they bled for the crown, half the council sent envoys to Vereen under the pretense of negotiation. One envoy returned with her tongue cut out. The others did not return at all. Evelyn found the bloodied sigil of the council and the envoy's handproof of treachery. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence in the war tent was colder than death. When she looked at the map, Edric knew what she meant before she signed a single word. No mercy. And for the first time, he agreed. The siege of Hollowsbury. The rebels fortified Hollowspire Keep, a fortress carved into black stone cliffs, impossible to breach by force. But Evelyn had walked its walls once as a child. She remembered a chapel buried beneath the east tower, and beneath it, an aquifer that led straight to the heart of the fortress. At midnight, she led a small company through the tunnels, Edric, Ronan, and 20 wolves sworn to silence. The passage reeked of rot and rusted faith. Symbols of the old goddess lined the walls, weeping condensation like tears. Evelyn moved first, torch held low. When they reached the altar, she placed the flame against the ancient carvings and whispered, not with her mouth, but with her will. The runes flared. The aquifer cracked open, flooding upward, breaking through the floors of the fortress above. Rebels screamed as holy water turned to steam against their poison-forged armor. Edric's army charged through the breach. The dual Lord Vereen met. Them in the throne room, an old man wrapped in arrogance and chainmail. "You bring a witch to war," he sneered. "You disgrace the goddess." Evelyn stepped forward, calm, bareheaded, her braids streaked silver by moonlight. "No," she wrote on a scrap of blood-stained parchment and held it up. "I bring her." He lunged. She didn't flinch. His blade struck, met by Edric's. Steel clashed. Sparks sang. Then, as Vereen raised his sword again, Evelyn caught his wrist with both hands. The mark on her palm burned. The goddess's light surged through her. The old lord fell to his knees, gasping, not dead, but stripped of the venom that kept him cruel. His eyes cleared. His voice broke. "What are you?" She met his gaze. Justice without noise, the victory and the cost. When dawn came, Hollowspire burned clean. The rebellion shattered. The banners of Vereen fell. But the kingdom had seen too much light and blood to return to simple worship. In the great hall, soldiers cheered. Ronan wept quietly. Edric turned to her, mud on his armor, love in his eyes. "They'll call this the War of the Witch Queen," he said. She smiled faintly, tracing the word queen in the air with her finger. Then she struck it through. "Not witch. Not queen. Equal." He pulled her close. "Then we'll rule as one." And though she could not hear the roar of victory, she felt it through the ground, through the bond, through the heartbeat of the man who had once been her enemy. The aftermath, when they returned to Silver Keep, the people didn't bow as they passed. They knelt, not from fear, but gratitude. Evelyn raised her hand, not in command, but peace, and every knee lifted again. "We kneel to none," she signed from the balcony, her gestures sweeping over thousands. "Not even me." Edric's smile was soft, reverent. "You've changed them," he said. She looked out at the endless night sky, the first dawn of peace stretching like a wound finally healed. "No," she wrote in his palm. "We've become them." And for the first time in generations, the kingdom believed that wolves could love their moon without devouring it. Chapter 15. The last silence, a final battle under a red sky. Sacrifice, arrow, poison, rebirth. Love conquers curse. The red sky, the dawn came wrong. It rose bleeding, streaks of crimson across the clouds, the color of prophecy and endings. The air tasted of iron and ash. Wolves howled before the first horn even sounded. Evelyn woke with the knowing already in her chest. The war was not finished. Peace had only been an intermission. She stood at the balcony, armor half-laced, eyes locked on the horizon. A storm of wings cut through the morning ravens carrying black banners, sigils painted in blood. Ronan burst into the chamber without ceremony. "They've crossed the river," he said. "Varen's son leads them. 10,000 strong. He blames you for his father's surrender." Edric entered behind him, already armored. The Alpha King's eyes were darker than dawn. "I thought hatred died with the old war," he said. Evelyn looked at him, calm and certain. "Hatred never dies," she signed. "It waits." He stepped closer, taking her hand. "Then let's finish what we started." The bond hummed warm between their palms, steady, sure, ready. The march they rode before the sun fully rose, leading the united packs of the north and south. Behind them, banners of silver and gold rippled like twin halves of the same moon. Evelyn's horse carried her with effortless grace, the goddess's coin resting cold against her throat. The wind was alive with omens. The sky deepened from red to scarlet, the clouds streaked with shadows shaped like wings. Ronan rode beside them, grim. "The omen's old," he said. "Red dawn, black fate. The goddess calls her children home." Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. "Then she can wait." The poisoned arrow, they met the enemy in the vale of broken oaks. Where her father's rebellion once began, Varen's son Kale waited on the ridge. Armor lacquered black, a red crescent painted across his chest. He was young, beautiful in the way fire is beautiful before it burns everything it touches. When he spoke, his voice carried through the wind like thunder. "You call her queen," he spat. "But she is death wrapped in mercy." Edric raised his sword. "Then meet mercy yourself." The battle broke. Steel met steel. Wolves met wolves. The earth shuddered under the weight of 1,000 stories ending. Evelyn fought like prayer given form. No spells, no rage, only precision, grace, inevitability. Every motion echoed the bond, her sword moving where Edric's heart called. His defense rising where her breath faltered. Then it happened. From the cliff above, an arrow hissed through the storm of battle fin. Dark, silent dot, it struck her shoulder. She stumbled, the world slowing into impossible stillness. The shaft glowed faintly green, the same cursed poison she'd once burned from another's veins. Edric's roar tore through the field. He caught her before she fell, his hands slick with her blood. No, not again." She looked up, lips pale, eyes clear. "It's not your fault. I can't lose you," he whispered, choking on the words. She touched his cheek, fingers trembling. "Then don't." And with that, she pulled the arrow free. The bond screamed, an explosion of gold that consumed everything it touched. The sacrifice, the battlefield froze. Every rebel soldier stopped mid-motion, eyes wide as light poured through the veil. The goddess's presence descended like a weightless storm. Moonlight and blood mingled into one. Evelyn rose, the wound blazing with golden fire. Her voice, silent for so long, spoke again. Enough. The word carried across miles. Men dropped weapons. Wolves knelt. The goddess's voice answered, soft and ancient. Child of silence, do you offer your breath again? Evelyn smiled faintly. No, I offer my life. Edric's eyes widened. Don't. But she was already moving, walking barefoot across the torn earth, leaving glowing footprints behind. Every rebel she passed froze, their eyes clearing, the poison burning out of them. Calvarine fell to his knees. Sobbing without sound, she reached the heart of the field, where the old oak had fallen long ago. The same tree beneath which her father had been taken. She pressed her bloodied hand against its roots. Let this end with me, she whispered. Let this kingdom learn peace, even if I can't hear it. The goddess's light flared. The bond snapped only to rebuild, brighter. Edric ran to her, falling to his knees. Catching her as she sank, her pulse fluttered weakly beneath his fingers. Stay, he begged. Please. She looked up at him one last time, lips moving slowly, painfully. Always then, her eyes closed. The field went still, and then the wind sighed. The light burst upward, scattering into thousands of luminous shards that felt like golden rain. Every wound on the field healed. Every cry softened. Evelyn's body dissolved into light. Rebirth. 3 nights later, the moon turned white again. The river thawed. The war ended. Edric stood at the foot of the oak where she had vanished. He had not left the spot since that day. Ronan approached, laying a hand on his shoulder. It's over. Edric shook his head. No, she promised always. And then he felt it, a heartbeat not his own. Soft, familiar, radiant, light gathered between the roots of the tree, shaping itself into form. When it faded, she stood there barefoot, breathless, alive. Her hair streaked with silver, her eyes glowing faintly gold. Evelyn, he whispered. She smiled, placing a finger to her lips. She mouthed. He realized then the world was utterly silent again. But the silence was not lost aught, it was peace. She stepped into his arms, and the bond flared not as fire, but as light. The new dawn, when dawn broke, it was golden. The red sky was gone. The war had ended not with blood, but with love that refused to die. Together they returned to Silver Keep. The people fell to their knees as they passed not in worship, but in awe. They called her the Silent Queen Reborn, and when Edric stood before the court, his voice rang through the hall. The age of conquest is over. The age of echo begins. He looked at her, his queen without a crown, her silence speaking louder than his words, and so did Chapter 16, The Queen, who spoke for Wolves, epilogue, years later. Their reign becomes legend. She builds the house of echoes. Silence turns into the kingdom's strength. The years after time, like snow, softened everything it touched. The war faded into songs sung around hearths. Children grew up not knowing what rebellion sounded like. They only knew peace, the kind that walked on quiet feet. Evelyn Ray, once the girl who swallowed her voice, became the name whispered when mothers prayed for strength. Not the witch queen, not the moon's curse. Just Evelyn, the queen who had learned to listen even when the gods would not speak. The Alpha King ruled beside her, his fury tempered into patience. He no longer raised his sword to prove strength. He raised it only to protect the silence they had built together. And though she could no longer hear his voice, she understood every word he never said. The house of echoes on the old cliffs of Hollowspire, where once blood had soaked stone, Evelyn built something new. A sanctuary of pale marble and open sky. No bells, no sermons, no weapons. Just space for breath, thought, and peace. It was called the House of Echoes. Here. The deaf and the broken came to learn new ways to speak. Hands became language. Eyes became voices. Silence became prayer. The children of soldiers sang poems to the goddess. The wounded taught rhythm by the beating of their hearts. And every year, When the red moon rose, the queen walked among them, her silver hair unbound, the goddess's coin still glinting at her throat. She would press her palm to the temple wall and close her eyes. And though she could not hear, she could feel the echo, generations learning that silence was never emptiness. It was potential. It was peace. The king and the Queen Edric grew gray before his time, though the strength in him never waned. In councils, his temper remained fierce, but one look from Evelyn was enough to calm the room. Her touch, her smile, the curve of her fingers in silent counsel carried more command than any decree dot in their private gardens. He would still speak aloud to her. She would trace his words on his lips, her eyes laughing, her heart answering through the bond they still shared, old, steady, immortal. Sometimes at night, she would wake to find him sitting by the window, watching the moon. "You still don't trust her," she'd sigh, teasing. He'd smile. "I trust her because she sent you." And she'd rest her head against his shoulder, feeling the thrum of his heart, her favorite sound in a world she no longer heard. Legacy decades later, when both were gone, their story became myth. The bards changed names, added dragons and gods, embroidered tragedy until truth glittered beneath the seams. But some things endured unchanged in every village. Healers taught the Ray sign, the hand language the queen had created for her people. In every pack, the Alpha swore oaths not with roar, but with silence, to remind themselves that restraint was strength. And every full moon, the wolves gathered at the cliffs of Hollow Spire, raising their heads not to howl, but to listen. They said that if the night was still enough, you could hear the faintest heartbeat in the air, a rhythm older than kingdoms. The bond that had once saved them all, the final echo centuries later, long after Silverkeep became a city of glass and song. A traveler climbed the ruins of the House of Echoes. At its center stood a statue, two figures carved from moonstone, the woman bareheaded, eyes lifted, one hand outstretched toward the horizon. The man, standing behind her, his hand resting over hers. The bond between them immortalized in light, beneath their feet, etched in a language of silence. 6 words. She spoke once, and the world listened. The traveler pressed his palm to the stone. The wind stirred, whispering across the cliffs like a familiar breath, and somewhere, deep in that hush, he thought he heard a voice that wasn't a voice at all, a presence. Patient, eternal, be still, it said, and you will understand.